Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Internet Anon, Aethemplar, or Aelthemplar. It's a hard word for me to pronounce. I discovered his posts online and started reading his Substack and found a brilliant youngish man with a lot of really interesting takes on current political processes, especially with regard to the historical context of what's going on. And in this conversation, we get into the history of the West and not necessarily its future, but its current direction. You can find links to his excellent work down there in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Aelthemplar. How's your internet life going?
Internet life? I don't know. I don't think I have an internet life, honestly.
Really?
Somehow, yeah, I I pretty much just have the Substack Twitter that I occasionally post to,
Yeah.
and I typically close the Twitter account for prolonged periods because I just can't stand it. It's
What?
just full of annoying people.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Overall, I mean the Substack is what people like, and that's what I focus on.
Yeah.
Mostly just history and theology. But for the most part, I feel like I don't actually have much of an internet life.
How do I pronounce this insanely Greekish name?
Oh, sorry, you cut off for a second. What do you say?
How do I pronounce your pseudonym?
Oh, it's just Aelthemplar. It's referencing the Old English spelling of the river Leith in Greek mythology. It's
Mm-hmm.
the river I like.
Hmm.
It's the river people went to forget their past, so I kind of view it as symbolic of as something like baptism or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, the River Leith is very interesting. It's not as well spoken about, but it shows up in some very old English poems as Aelth rather than Leith. So I think they just
Hmm.
accidentally added a vowel in there. But
Hmm.
no, I grew up Catholic, was Protestant, and then came back to Catholicism. So to me, it's very symbolic of wanting to forget some of the things I feel are bad teachings in Protestantism while keeping some of the good things. Like for example, I still read Luther as a historian because he stands at the border between the Middle Ages and the I guess you could say the Renaissance, but like early modernity,
Yeah.
and so he can as a historian he can speak about medieval things from his youth and carry them into early modernity in his older age. He just happens to live at that crossroads era.
Yeah.
And so like even though I no longer agree with his theology, his ability to take medieval myth is something I like. So there are different characters at that time period that I like because of like the ability to like almost like baptize something from the Middle Ages into modernity. And this idea of like baptizing old things and co-opting them for new things, I'm very
Hmm.
fascinated by that. I'm an architect, so I like to think about that for historical
Yeah.
buildings and things like that.
Yeah. I know it would be impossible to say, but are we kind of, is your life kind of straddling two eras in some way or another? Similar to how Luther
Uh,
straddled?
I I don't know. I do feel a certain foreboding nature to the current era.
Hmm.
Um, I wrote a Substack article last week about um looking into Hegel's view about historical dialectics and how things feed into the next era. He was convinced that all of history was culminating into constitutional monarchy, and when he died, people like Andrew Jackson, the President of America, they were increasingly looking like constitutional monarchs rather than presidents,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
so he felt like the era was culminating in that, and then
Was he the Francis Fukuyama of his day, that Hegel?
in many ways, and a few decades after him, everyone was convinced everything was culminating towards communism or something like it. And then after him, everyone was convinced that liberal democracy would be the finality of history. And now we're transitioning into something else. And I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't like the. I'll say this if you're recording it. You can say this. I don't like the ghost dancing of mid-century politics like fascism and communism. I think that these are movements that attempted to take on liberal democracy and failed. And not only did they fail, they made liberal democracy stronger. And ghost dancing this performative, extinct political system is not going to get you anywhere except much like the Native Americans ghost dancing on a reservation while your enemies conquer you.
Yeah.
I think that
Ghost dancing
whatever
is a way of trying to bring back the glory of a past era that's faded.
exactly,
Right. It's kind of
exactly,
a cargo cult for your own greatness or your
exactly.
society's own greatness. Yeah.
And I fear that both among the left and right, there is a significant amount of ghost dancing. And if you actually want to
Hmm.
answer liberal democracy, you have to look to something new. Um,
Really?
treat it. Yeah, I have no idea what that new thing would be.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
But I'm kind of surprised that a Catholic would point to the new.
I know, right? Because we have popes that have literally written treaties, kind of like against the new thing. But you know the one I'm thinking about from the distributus era of writing. It was the last Pope Leo. He wrote against the new things. But fun fact, the word he used for new can also be translated as revolution. So against the revolutionary things. I wouldn't say as a
Hmm.
Catholic to embrace the new things. The role of a Catholic has always been, I think, to look at the new thing, be aware of it,
Hmm.
find find what works, find what is good in it, but you have to let go of the bad, and the bad will show symptoms a lot faster. So, like, well, what is the bad of this new
Okay.
thing? I
Yeah.
think you could point, the new thing, whatever it is, it seems to have an obsession with spectacle. As long as politics creates spectacle, something, it feels like something's changing when it's not. It's just spectacle. So
Hmm.
I've also like I've been trying to write these things in terms of like demonic personalities. So like the spectacleist is like a demonic personality in the new thing. The laughing man is another kind of demon of the new thing where people just laugh at what's happening. They don't actually do anything. They just like laughing at people suffering and being worse off or their enemies suffering.
Hmm.
And I think this is a kind of spiritual toxicity that will corrupt you. The more you laugh at something happening to your enemies, the more you grow unsensitized and view them less as people. And I think that's dangerous.
Hmm.
There are a number of demons in this new thing I've started trying to plot out, but because it's new, not all of them have shown their face yet.
Hmm. I don't see how we get away from spectacle without getting away from democracy in one form or another.
That seems to be the case. You know Jay Burden, right? The
Hmm.
podcaster. I've talked
Oh
with him
yeah, I
about
know
this,
Jay.
and I've talked about this, and we've had like shows about this in terms of spectacle being a kind of last ditch effort of extracting political capital for a desensitized population.
Hmm.
Um, Spectacle in many ways is trying to if you treat political units that you're trying to get votes out of as a kind of molecule or atom, like you put it through chemical reactions to react and get heat out of it. In many ways, things like spectacles are almost like trying to split the atom. You're going beyond atomizing people. You're now actively destroying their identities, personalities,
Hmm.
beliefs, and stuff like that. It's like for a brief while, many years ago when I was in high school, I experimented with Buddhism, and while it was stupid as a Catholic to experiment with Buddhism, it's something every teenager did in my age.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things I did uh, appreciate from Buddhism is the idea of like tabula rasa. There's like this final state of deconstructing yourself where you're like almost like a clean slate,
Hmm.
and I feel as if one of the things that modern politics does is they try to deconstruct even the tabula rasa, even the blank slate. And at that point, you just have dust and ashes. You don't actually have something to build upon.
Hmm.
Uh, if that makes sense. I might be overusing the
Well,
imagery.
no, I mean, I see it as something possible, but if you look at, I guess I'm just going to use the word boomer, not to, I mean, more of the vibe side of the boomer rather than just the people born from this time to that time and that, we're in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and that won't go away. Though there's that generational thing, but we just moved from Western Washington to Eastern Washington, and Western Washington. It's just got trans stuff all over the place. Every supermarket has at least one working in the bagging area. But all the churches have rainbow flags or worse. Those child mutilation flags, with the
Yeah.
white power flag going into the pink power, blue power, and then the black and brown power, and then that chevron. Which is, to me, it's like it visually represents deconstruction. It's exactly what Saruman the White thought was power when he got closer and closer to identifying with evil. He broke apart the white into all the different colors that constitute the white. So it represents deconstruction, but there's something about those people who believe in that, who really do believe and adhere to these principles. I don't know how long it's going to take them to be deconstructed, but there is some sort of glue and power and status there. So I'm just trying to push back on or see the fault lines of if we can speed that up, because they do have power. They do have, at least in Western Washington and other progressive centers, these people haven't really budged even after watching, the destruction of their youth through trans and then through the lockdowns and so on and so forth, all the stuff they were really on board with. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are of those people, those progressive, well-off, boomerish people.
I have a term I'm trying to define. I haven't published it
Hmm.
yet, but I call that a form of ethnolocalism, uh, in the sense that it may bring to mind certain ethnically homogenous communities, but if you understand that the left is really trying to create a new ethnos, it can actually be categorized within other ethnically homogenous communities. What is
Hmm.
what you're describing except an ethnos? It has a certain quality of people groups that have similar interests, similar backgrounds, similar upbringings. It's
Yeah.
attempting it, the trans stuff is fundamentally attempting a an ethnogenesis. It's not one that can reproduce like a racial ethnogenesis,
Yeah.
but it has its own method of reproduction through indoctrination.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, it's merely an ethno state by other means. I view the trans stuff, the rainbow stuff, as fundamentally a form of ethnogenesis, attempting to create a new ethnicity that's defined by sexual preferences and liberation. And of course, it by its nature, it tries to keep out things that are members of that ethnogenesis.
Hmm.
So in practice, you see it booting traditional straight people, things like that. Anything that feels is the other. Despite it, but
Hmm.
despite I would make a controversial argument that despite it billing itself as left wing, it is fundamentally far right because it is a very strictly ethnogenic state. It just happens to build it on like non-racial means. I
Okay,
might
hold
break
on.
the
Let
brain
me.
of that.
Yeah, that's a switcheroo. Let me see if my brain can do it. So we were driving to go meet some friends for the these things called wings. Do you guys have wings where you're from? Like these places that just serve wings. Like
Yeah, yeah.
we ordered like 100 wings of varying degrees of heat. My digestive tract is resonating with that experience, even up to today. But as we were going down there, we were on the freeway. We were on 90. We're in Spokane now. And there were people on the bridge. Yeah, this big sign, immigration is our strength or something like that.
Hmm.
Immigrants are what we are. Like we are the immigrants and we want the immigrants. And then there's a Black Lives Matter thing there too. And, and then the rainbow flags and stuff. And it's always shocked me since being at Evergreen and seeing all this intersectionality stuff. It's like, the indigenous aren't really necessarily on board with the deconstruction of gender, and the black people aren't necessarily on board with all of the Hispanics coming in, cheap labor, and like leeching away like opportunities for economic growth in these communities. So they all don't really work together, but the white people holding it all together and feeling good about like holding them all together,
Yeah,
they're at the
you
heart
can't
of it.
exactly. You can't call it um a national white thing, but it is an ethno-localism. It is an ethno-local
What do you mean by
community
local then?
because it would not tolerate any white people from outside that community, or at least any white people that have different views.
No,
It's still
it's true because
fundamentally,
they really inside that cult, and by cult I don't just mean it like they're brainwashed or anything. You can go there, but just like cult, that culture, that really strict adherence to a belief system, they do constantly bring up the MAGA country, right? Like there's like there be
yeah,
dragons outside of their immediate periphery, outside of their coffee shops, and
exactly.
huh,
MAGA is a different ethno-locality. It is I call it ethno-localism because it is a local phenomena, ethnically homogenous, and it puts up borders whether it wants to say it or not. Whether they want to admit it or not, that community
huh.
you're describing has strict borders that keeps out people that aren't like them.
How would that make that not left? I kind of see what you mean by right being like concentric to itself and strong borders to itself, but how would that be not left?
It's
What?
it's weird
Yeah.
because it really depends on what you define left as. If you're going by
Yeah.
a broader historic term of the left is to deconstruct, borders and definitions and things like that. But the second they put up those borders, they don't welcome people that aren't like them. It is fundamentally far right, even if it's adopting far left speaking points. It has
Okay.
created a far right community that believes in far left stuff. It's a weird thing, but
Yeah. Hmm.
if you allow yourself to notice that it still has borders, it still has culture, it still has strict homogeneity, it is technically speaking from a I guess an older definition far right.
Hmm. Side note: is horseshoe theory bullshit or not from your point of view?
I mean, I don't really like materialism, so I question the left and right as the left and right are fundamentally a construct of a material worldview where the right wants to
Hmm.
maintain its borders and culture and the left wants to expand and be more open. And this all comes down to like economic and political ideas within materialism of like, the material sub, there's no spirit. It's only pure material definitions.
Hmm.
And so from a materialist perspective, what's right and what's left, a right is again a ethnic localism. A left is a global homogeny of sort. Maybe not even homogenous. Once you start introducing things like homogenous outside of trade and stuff like that, you're no longer really left wing. You're more right wing because you're maintaining borders.
Yeah.
I'm trying to force a proper definition of right and left onto a country that has
Interesting.
blurred the lines significantly.
Hmm.
Fundamentally, left and right in this country comes down to how you look, right? So it is fundamentally material. If you're waving a rainbow flag, you're left wing. If you're waving a MAGA flag, it's right wing. But it's still fundamentally like what flag are you waving? It's a material substance. Nobody's caring about the soul or spirit of the person. It's just
Hmm.
a material appearance.
Hmm. Well, they do accuse each other of being demonic of one stripe or
Yeah,
another.
yeah. You can't avoid.
NPCs, bots, which are
Yeah,
very material things.
yeah. I mean, NPC bot. It's just another word for orc or foreigner or thing that is not like them.
Yeah.
It's just borders. It fundamentally comes down to borders. They're creating borders. They're defining the in group and the out group. So by a material definition, it's right wing.
Hmm.
Even if it adopts, even if it parades itself as left, as the most leftist of things, you know these people would not welcome anyone else. So it is not egalitarian. It is not welcoming. It is not global. So it is fundamentally from a broader perspective, right wing, even if within the American context, it's left wing.
Yeah, it's like that airport or the mall where there's a food court, right? So there is difference, but everybody is like bound together by the same monetary system or bound together by the same plaza,
Yeah.
right?
And as the old thing dies, you know that these ethnic local communities will start trying to find ways to create enclosed economies with their own monetary systems, their own
You see
finances.
it. I mean, all women businesses, when you go to the natural food store, like let's say all women businesses are black owned business and stuff. So
Yeah,
it's a signal that they're part of the
it's a s-
tribe,
it's a it, and it's a
mega tribe.
material signal. It's always a material signal because this is like a materialist framework.
Hmm. Is there is there a non-material framework for left and right, or political framework, or does that fall away when
I
we're talking
I think it fall.
theologically?
I think once you abandon materialism, it kind of falls away. Like once
Hmm.
you start looking at things of the spirit, it really comes down to more like things like creeds and belief systems and metaphysics. Like the older Catholic view has
Hmm.
been that I'm trying to remember my catechism that because like the catechism doesn't use terms like left and right. They use terms like uh submission to the Pope or rebellious, right? Like it's in the Catholic framework, it's more a question of those older values of the spirit. Are you loyal to your authorities? Are you loyal to your
Hmm.
um God and Father and priest and stuff like that? Or are you disloyal? Do you break away? Are you obsessed with being independent and sovereign as a personal being? And
Hmm.
that's I mean we can kind of say that that's left and right in the sense that the church would say it's right and the rebel is left, but it doesn't quite fall within the materialist framework. It's more
Okay.
within how your heart is, how your soul is, and where it's oriented. Are you submitting to your place in the great chain of being, or are you trying to break the chains?
Hmm. So what happened with the Reformation and then the Enlightenment? And this is a material phenomena, so maybe that's where the answer will lie. But there was a massive amount of economic and ingenuity released, and art and culture by the West when it started to, maybe this is disputed, when it started to innovate and break away from tradition in certain ways. I guess even just you do things how they always have been done. And then there was this innovative spirit in the West that kind of skyrocketed and allowed for just massive amounts of gains on cultural levels and on material levels as well. And I'm wondering, we kind of talk on the right, we talk about authority, we talk about hierarchy, right? But everybody I talk to is still kind of a liberal. They're still kind of like get off my lawn, like kind of
Yeah, yeah.
libertarian. Like at least in America, even the hard right Americans are like, and that's what makes the right wing discourse on the online kind of interesting and alive, is because people are drawing lines and saying, no, you can't tell me what to do in one way or another. So when we introduce, even on a spiritual level, this idea of obedience and loyalty to a tradition, to a homogeny, it doesn't seem like we're kind of doing a ghost dance on the right
Yeah, yeah,
with
exactly.
hierarchy. What do you think about that? And how do we like
Uh,
re-implement proper authority, proper obedience in this time, in this state.
it it's confusing because it would technically mean Biden was more right wing than Trump
Hmm.
because he was trying to create national obedience, national authority. He was trying to
Yeah.
reconstruct these older
You see the
values,
pictures of him.
even though
Yeah.
even though he's an old senile man and enabling some really truly demonic people.
Hmm.
The way in which he's implementing it is fundamentally more right wing than something like MAGA, which is I do kind of subscribe to Academic Agent, if you've heard of him, his views that MAGA is the Kali Yuga. It's the ultimate liberalism. It's like Americanism and
Hmm.
liberalism applied like it may have acquired a significant number of far right people. But the way in which it operates in practice is more like 90s liberalism.
Hmm.
Get off my lawn, or let people have their own lawns. It's fundamentally a form of deconstructing the American hierarchy. Um,
Hmm.
and these things, again, these things get very blurry because when you try to look at it from a broader, older perspective versus in situ, with the way in which people materially stamp these terms onto things, it
Hmm.
is inverted. It is very much so inverted. Um,
Hmm.
and it's hard to conceptualize it. But yeah, I mean, you look at how Biden ran the country in terms of a strong federal government enforcing strong loyalty. Loyalty is the number one thing, rather
Yeah.
than rather than an ability. Uh, that
Yeah.
is kind of more medieval. That's more medieval. Whether you like it or
Huh.
not, it is fundamentally more medieval.
Well, he was
Not
a
that I'm
Catholic
saying,
president.
yeah, not that I'm saying I'm a fan of Biden in material consequences, but in terms of like I'm almost saying I wish I had that with a better material appearance, right?
Hmm. Well, why? Because you would be more on board with it, or because you would be able to recognize it and show it for what it is easierly?
Fundamentally, I view it as more stable, and so one of my friends once said
Hmm.
it's easier to make a Democrat right wing than it is to make a Republican win. That's what one of my friends said once, and I've always taken that to heart. Where when there's an emergency, when there's a problem, America's left wing will always adopt, the Christian nationalism or something like that. Not that I'm
Hmm.
necessarily a fan of Christian nationalism. I would view myself more as I just like Catholicism and the way it works. But
Hmm.
you know, when Republicans win, they always like bend over backwards to come off as innocent, not violent, and stuff like that. Not that I like violence, but when the left wing wins and it has an emergency, it goes right wing very quickly. You see it with Keir Starmer now. You see it with the European Union is getting very anti-immigrant all of a sudden because they realize it's nobody wants to fight for them. And so now they're propping up European identity again, and they're
Hmm.
propping up all the old values because they needed to survive. And yet at the same
Hmm.
time, when a so-called right winger takes over something like Austria or other
Italy.
places, Italy, they immediately become very imperial leftists, very imperial liberals. Maybe not leftists, but very imperial corporatists. The corporations need free labor, so let's bring in 200,000 immigrants that we don't have to pay at wages.
Yeah.
In this
Huh.
regard, I, I have to be careful, but I kind of view myself as old left to some degree. Like if you know who Tony Benn is in British history, do you know who that is?
No. No.
Tony Benn was a Labour. He was a Lord in the British Parliament, and he wanted to become a member of Parliament rather than a Lord. And there was a rule that said you can't become a member of Parliament if you're a Lord, and you can't give up your hereditary titles as a Lord. So you're basically not allowed to become an MP if you're a Lord. And so he personally fixated on creating a law that would allow him to give up his title so he could run for MP because he was a big like fan of democracy and he wanted to he wants to run and earn the right to govern. He doesn't want it to be inherited like in the Lords. And so he got his
Hmm.
law. He renounced his titles. He ran for MP and he got it. And he has some very interesting writing. in the 70s and 60s. Fundamentally, he's from the Fabian school and has a semi-Marxist view of the world. It's important to recognize British socialism is older than Karl Marx. They had socialism before Karl Marx, so British
Hmm.
socialism is is not Marxist technically, but it did overlap with a lot of Marxism. But he came from a view of the left where a state should protect its workers, have borders to protect their workers from foreign competition, and provides resources for the people to make a good living. Like that kind of old left view.
Hmm.
That's still
Hmm.
it's still believed in the nation state. It's still believed in borders. It's still believed in helping its workers compete globally. And so Tony Benn is kind of who I look up to for political theory. Um, but that
Hmm.
doesn't really exist in America as a practice. This idea that a state should protect its workers, give them rights, and empower them to compete in a social democracy. It doesn't really exist in America. So I just ended up saying like I'm not political because
Yeah.
uh, if if I try to pick and choose from different sides, you don't get anywhere really in America. Um,
Hmm.
it's annoying because like, like like for example, the immigration crisis right now. There is a Catholic solution to this that would instantly fix it, and that would be to um, document workers and require minimum wages. Because the second corporations have to document their workers and show they're paying them fairly, they're not going to want illegal aliens anymore. They're going to not be able to make money on them anymore. The
Hmm.
competition of illegal immigration instantly goes away. But you can't do that in America because the right wing doesn't like minimum wages and the left wing wants it slave labor. And they'll call it egalitarian and welcoming, but in reality it's just
Yeah.
slave labor.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and so from a
Yeah.
Catholic perspective,
I mean,
how do
Schumer
you
was like, "We don't. Do you really want to pay more for avocados? Like, do you really want to pay the slaves? Like, that's basically what he was saying
yeah,
when they
yeah,
were talking
yeah,
about like deportations. Do you really want to pay the slaves? Do you really want
yeah.
that?"
And like I I do hate the boomer slop that tries to say, "Oh, the Democrats are just defending their slaves again in another century." That
Mm.
is very much a
Yeah.
boomer
Yeah.
slop, but it is to some degree true, a little bit true. Um,
Oh, there's something that you. Sorry to interrupt. There's something, but I'm trying to flesh out your ideas because you're presenting this inversion of things. That's really novel to me, and it's helping me like rearrange these categories that have kind of gotten dusty. And I
mhm.
like being flexible with my thought. But there's a there's something you hinted at about when the left wing is in power, then fascism and hard power comes into being when it's going in the direction of the left or in the direction of the Democrats. They do not shy away from politically persecuting their enemies. When their enemies have power, they use every trick in the book to delegitimize power, and then when they have power, they do every trick in the book to legitimize power. And that's
Yeah,
you could
yeah.
definitely see that in Trump 1.0 and then Biden's reign. And I think things are a little bit. We'll see how it snaps down. But just the last 8 years, excepting 2024 to present, when the right gets power, they are weak. Like they're not as right as you would expect them to be. They can't be strong in the sense that a Democrat can be strong because the Democrat, when they are in power, they are going in the direction of power, the direction of the state, the centralization of power, the everybody on board and everybody is, there's a consensus and between the corporations and the government that's very similar to fascism. It's just rainbow fascism, right? It's the CIA, that awesome advertisement where they had like this dyslexic ADHD disabled Latino woman with a gender identity. She's the CIA right now. Like this, we are waterboarding people while giving them exogenous hormones, like we're really
Yeah, yeah.
unleashing or releasing their liberty through this stuff. But the right becomes, this is the idea that I'm trying to think of, like, why do Republicans, when they get in power, they're either weak or they're just basically a Democrat. They're like weak sauce. And it's because they're, when they get in power, they're going against power. And so they can't be anything other than weak because they don't have total power, because power itself is Democrat.
Left
Power
wing.
itself
But
is left wing.
yeah, that and in many ways the problem in which you are describing uh contains within it in a Hegelian sense its own internal contradictions that lead to its demise.
Mm.
Because I did this at the last stream I did with Jay Burden, and we discussed liberal democracy from a religious perspective, like as a religion. And
Okay.
I pointed out one of the things I pointed out is that liberal democracy build itself after World War II as, you know, egalitarian, pro democracy, pro liberty, all the good things that won it the war, that in opposition of the evil Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, it's not so much defeated the Nazis as it synthesized anything it could find useful from the Nazis. And in a
Yeah.
Hegelian sense, you have the
And from the
dialectic,
commies too.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yarvin
It
says the two greatest projects of the 20th century America were run by Nazis, being NASA, and commies, being the civil rights movement. And
exactly,
those two together is America.
and you can frame that in Hegelian sense of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis to build up liberal democracy into the world religion after World War II. Fascism and communism were antitheses of liberal democracy. Liberal democracy ate them, synthesized anything it could find of use, and then made itself stronger. And this is also
Hmm.
why it's any return to communism or fascism, it's just pure cope. Those things only empower liberal democracy. Those things are food for liberal democracy to
Yep.
justify itself and empower itself. You will not
Yep.
find you cannot defeat a dragon by feeding it, you know? It's just stupid. You're not going to
Hmm.
find the sword that cuts the dragon's heart by feeding it. It's dumb. And
In a sense, even like
yeah.
Patriot Front, which is trying to be, well, it's always going to be coded as Fed posting. Anything anti-government is going to be coded as the government playing a trick to get more power, because that's how it works. The only thing that's legitimate
Yeah.
legitimizes power. But you said something about the seed of its own undoing. Is there any like salty pill
Yeah.
there?
Well, when liberal democracy became the new world order thing, like we can, in the 1950s, it was the new thing. Um, you know, in many ways, it started as the antithesis of absolute monarchy, right? It started as that, and then it defeated absolute monarchy, and then it created these antitheses children to synthesize it. I'm just talking in terms of like Hegelian dialectics over
Mm,
generations.
yeah.
And
So it
now,
created the commies. It created the fascists in a
and
way.
so now that liberal democracy has become the thesis, it has to create some. If something is going to become the new thesis, it has to be a poisonous antithesis rather than a nutritious one, if you want, building on Hegel.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so if you view liberal democracy's claims as being for human rights, for democracy, for liberalization, these kind of things that it build itself as the priesthood of, like this is their god and they are the priests of, then you have to start recognizing that things like what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, these are in direct contradiction to the religious dogma of liberal democracy. Uh, Not to get too into it, because if this goes up on YouTube, God knows what's going to be censored. But these are
I think we're
things
safe.
which,
Go forward. Yeah.
okay,
Dig into
yeah.
it.
So like, if if the things which call themselves the Western world, which in this case would include Israel because it's within the framework of the Western world, once they start doing things like genocide, apartheid, things like that, and it's tolerated, it's essentially failing as a religious ideal. It's failing to stop the sins, right? It's failing. The
Hmm.
priest is failing to resolve the sins, and over time, as to justify these sins and not treat the sin, not offer forgiveness for the sin because
Hmm.
of power. I mean, because of power. Power demands that the interests of the priests are overlooked.
Hmm.
You can't pay attention to the priest's sins.
Yeah,
Um,
Epstein
that
didn't exist,
yeah,
let alone kill
exactly.
himself. Yeah.
And like these are things that both the right and left notice on the
Yeah.
edges.
Yeah.
There are things that create a distancing from radicals both on the right and left. Uh, I'm trying to word this correctly. What I said in Jay Burden's show is a lot more organized, but that's one
So,
thing when it comes to things like human rights that's being violated. When the EU starts canceling elections because it doesn't like the results, now
yeah.
you're violating
Isn't that
democracy.
awesome? Isn't that awesome
Yeah,
that they do that? It's like,
yeah,
that's chutzpah, man. That's power.
that is power, but raw power often contradicts the religious order. It's just the way it goes.
Hmm.
And so when in order to maintain raw power, you violate your holiness, if you will, then people start questioning the religion. And the thing I think that's going to cripple the
Hmm.
religion is when nations, maybe BRICS, maybe someone else in the future, when they can reject the West and reject it rationally, reject it on a rational basis, that is going to break people in the West because they think that they are the culmination of rational, thought out government.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
you obviously can't rationally reject the rational. So for them, it's a blight. It's a sin that can't be forgiven. The religion can't fix that. When Chinese cities look more impressive than the West, and their non-democratic, non-Western values are creating something better than the West, you are no longer the superior religion. You are no longer the
Hmm.
moral authority. You've planted the
Hmm.
seeds of your own falsification of your religious system. And so liberal democracy, when it looks at something like China building these impressive cities and power bases, when it looks at something like Russia basically defeating it in Ukraine, and when it looks at things like Iran not bowing and things like that, this starts to create blights that cannot be forgiven in the temple of democracy.
Hmm.
And that starts, you can almost imagine it like people go to church to watch the priest, regardless of what religion. It could be Islam, it could be Buddhism, it could be Christianity. People go to a temple to watch a religious figure conduct a sacrament which renders forgiveness of one's sins. For the West, this is our colonial legacy, our oppressive legacy, our imperial legacy. As long
Hmm.
as we're for human rights and democracy, we're forgiving ourselves of the sins of our past. Once you have people becoming more powerful than us without going to that religious structure, that religion loses authority, and the priests' magic in the temple when they
Hmm.
dispense they dispense forgiveness for the past and stuff like that. That no longer works. People can openly see that the
Yeah.
ceremony is not the only means to A, it's not the only means to forgive sin. B, it's not even an effective means to forgive sin. So the religious structure of liberal democracy is in crisis right now
Hmm.
because alternative models are fulfilling power without needing to go through its religious ceremonies.
Yeah. Tucker Carlson, he's a podcaster guy. He used to work for this network called Fox News. Last night, he gave a speech at some sort of youth conference called Turning Point USA, led by this guy named Charlie Kirk. It's a conservative youth kind of movement-ish thing, and it's
Yeah,
got a
yeah.
lot of traction in the MAGA sphere. And Tucker came out and he said all the things that you wouldn't expect anybody else to say about about questioning power, about questioning specifically Israel's power, and and airing the grievances from the conservative point of view of Israel having too much power over our country, over the United States, and and then the reaction to that in other Bowers on the right on Twitter has been, look at this neo-Nazi. Look at these. He's giving all these dog whistles, and he's literally saying, "You cannot call me a Nazi because I'm not, and you cannot ignore my question and just call me a bigot." That's what the left was doing up until 6 minutes ago, and now you're doing it, and it's not going to abide anymore. That, I don't know if the worry, or if, I guess there is kind of worry about bigotry and hate, and he was warning against that in his speech. It's like, if you don't answer these questions, then yes, of course there's going to be hate online, because you're stirring up resentment. And this stuff is just basic human psychology. And the people who don't want these questions answered about Epstein or whatever, and maybe Epstein, was totally innocent, and, Ghislaine Maxwell or whatever actually didn't have any clients. She just did something wrong for no reason. Legitimizing this core concern from the left and the right, from the right, and the left has been doing that since October 7th. One wonders where that's going. But what you're framing it in, you're framing it within the context of liberal democracy. You're framing it within context of the West. And it's not just the Semites or the Jews being the problem. It's the entire religious structure post-World War II is battering against itself because it's failing to upkeep, as you put it, the ritual that it was performing of its own legitimacy. Like, it's delegitimizing itself. So where does that leave the right? Where does that leave the left? And is it just wokeness all the way down? Is James Lindsay kind of essentially right about the woke left and the woke right gaining predominance because the centers, the so-called liberal center, is no longer legitimate because it has nothing to stand on. It no longer has the integrity to perform the function that it was performing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of James Lindsay, but he does have a certain degree of insight in terms of the left and right are both leaving the temple, right? The edges of the left and right are leaving the temple. They're searching for something new. And whenever a religious system fails, of course, you get this searching period, this searching for something new and legitimate. And some people are going to fall to the ghost dancing of fascism and communism, and they're going to go nowhere. They're going to end up on a reservation of a power center. They're hopeless. It's tragic, but they're hopeless. Some people are they're going to entirely give up and turn to nihilism, of course, in the Nietzschean sense. They're just going to be complete nihilists. In many ways, I'm kind of building on Nietzsche there in a sense of, like, he saw this in his era. He saw that beginning of searching for new gods, right? And in many ways, he was going to bury Yahweh in this grave, like God is dead, but it turns out we put progress in the grave instead. And so now we're in this where that's actually a Greerism. Have you heard of Greer the pagan? He's like an environmentalist.
Is he contemporary with us, or is he older?
Yeah, he's alive. He's alive. He's a bit older,
Okay.
but he's alive. Michael, I think his name's like Michael Robert Greer or something like that. But he writes kind of like half poetry, half environmental insight in terms of like the era in which we're in. But one of my favorite lines of his is, if you come to the grave Nietzsche dug for God, you'll find progress there instead. We in many ways, the God in which Nietzsche was saying was dying, it wasn't really the Christian God. It was the European monarchical God of sorts. And now that era came and went, and now we're burying liberal democracy in that grave because that God is dying. And what is going to be when people on the right and left, they start soul searching, there's really a question of what's going to find for them. Where are they going to find vitality, really? And
Okay.
and that's hard to predict, because the conditions in which a new vitality would prove themselves, I don't think they've really emerged yet. So you're kind of trying to design a species for an environment that hasn't matured yet, and so you
Okay.
can't. You can throw things to the wind and see what sticks, but it's really not possible at this time to see what's going to survive in the post-liberal democracy order, because we're not there. We're not quite there yet. We're still in, like, the patient is terminal. They're in hospice care, but they're not dead yet. The environment hasn't changed yet. It's
Hmm.
really impossible to tell. All we can know for sure is that the things which liberal democracy defeated in the past are not going to provide vital forces for when it's gone.
Yeah.
Those things are merely within this materialist framework.
Yeah.
And again, like you're not going to find it in monarchy. You're not going to find it in absolute monarchy. You're not going to find it in Caesarism. You're not going to find it in
Hmm.
communism or fascism, and you're not going to find it in liberal democracy itself. All of these things are dying and dead, dying or dead. That they can't you can't raise them from the grave. You can't recreate, terraform the new sphere to be the environment that they would prosper in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the term new sphere, but
I call it the
that's a
taco
really old.
sphere. It's the
Like
the soup in which the memes propagate.
like the new sphere of humanity, the realm in which we think. You would have to terraform it at a planetary level to recreate the environment in which your preferred system thrives. And that's simply not going to happen in a non-unipolar bifurcating world. You don't
Hmm.
have the willpower, you don't have the forces, you don't have the unity. It's not going to happen. The environment is changing. You can't control where it's going to change. And in many ways you kind of have to just wait until the environment settles to even attempt to build something new. But at the same time, you don't want to end up like the ghost dancers on a reservation of whatever comes next.
Yeah.
So you almost have to practice a certain degree of discernment and patience.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
nobody likes that answer at all. Everybody hates that answer, but that's the answer I always give people. You are not going to find a solution before the environment matures. You just because you don't know what will live in that environment yet.
Even the right wing needs to beware the theater kids among itself, the influencers,
Yeah,
the dancers, yeah, the performers.
yeah. In many ways, anything that leads you to find friendship and brotherhood and care for each other and your neighbors and endure for a little while this happens, that's
Yeah.
probably your best bet. Where at the very least you'll have a network of people that will help you, and you will help. You can't just be a moocher. Um, and you just have
Hmm.
to wait. You just have to take care of each other, build little power bases, and wait because you don't know what's coming. It's impossible to predict, and you don't want to throw away your resources into something that might die the second the environment changes.
Well, how do you? I guess you've brought a lot of Hegel into the conversation, but by what means do you formulate predictions of likely landscapes?
Me, in many ways, I don't want to predict. I have a
Yeah, I know you don't
sensibility.
want to, but you can't help it because you're a freaking man. You're a
Yeah, yeah.
human.
Uh,
You're projecting all the time.
it's sometimes helpful to see, like almost like a doctor. Like if you know liberal democracy is dying, you then have to ask what's killing it, because that's probably the soil that something new will come from.
Oh, okay.
So what is actually killing liberal democracy? You have a number of things. I think a lot of people point often correctly to these kind of like tech world feudal lords, almost like people like uh Allah forgive me for saying his name, Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk, he's now hated by the left and right because he's burned so many bridges. But other figures like Peter Thiel and things like that, these are like
Hmm.
personalities with the capital to, you know that whatever they
Imprint.
do is going to,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they're going to survive whatever happens because they have the resources and means to. But of course, they don't know where they're going either. They're just trying to watch out for them and their friends. You also have, again,
Hmm.
like I said earlier, these ethno-localisms that are seeking to become semi-sovereign at a local level in every political spectrum, from the far left to the far right. These ethno-local entities are probably going to outlive the system,
Yeah.
whatever they are. It could be anything from the Rainbow Flag Coalition in a Seattle downtown
Yeah.
to a Christian Nationalist Baptist something or another church in some random land that they bought
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
There's a diversity of it, but again, in many ways, these things, when you talk about ethno-localism, you're kind of talking about something that is becoming a reservation, um, for itself.
Hmm.
It is in many ways a reservation. So I wouldn't say to look to these things for the future, but you might be able to live amongst it one to your liking to at least survive.
Yeah.
Um, and y- well, the kind of power that happens in the East, like the Far East, it's hard to describe it. It's almost like a kind of national capitalism where you
Hmm.
pay loyalty to the president, the premier, whatever, whoever's in power in order to do business. Basically, how China works. Um, so
Hmm.
in many ways, they're kind of like these weird fusions of ancient Chinese bureaucracy and imperialism with modern capitalism. It's kind of a bizarre system.
Hmm.
But of course, nobody wants to move to China, so you have to look like unless you're gonna just move up and move to a stable area in China and serve the new leader, the great leader, the fearless leader, which 99% of people are not willing to do that. So that's kind of a dead end. You know it's going to survive, outlive liberal democracy, but it's not something for you, right?
Yeah.
It's like talking about Persia and you're a 6th century French servant, a French serf. It's kind of irrelevant to you. You know Persia will outlive the Roman Empire as it falls, but it's entirely irrelevant to your existence.
Hmm.
Uh, so trying to again going back to your question, try to predict what will be the new thing. I can see what's killing liberal democracy. I don't know to what degree the winning horse is. If I was a betting man, I would probably suck up my anti-billionaire stance and just roll with a tech billionaire just to survive.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
like how do I keep the brain computers out of me, right? How do I protect myself and my religious beliefs living under this tech lord that's like
Yeah.
like Bastian man doing terrible things almost.
Hmm. Yeah, Curtis Yarvin's got some writing about alternatives to liberal democracy in his Mencius Moldbug days on unqualified reservations, and one of his long essays, which I recommend people just listening to the computerized audiobook by Skeptical Waves. This is this other guy who redid Yarvin's earlier work in The Voice of Orson Welles, which I find hilarious, but either way, he's really funny writer, but he has this idea of patchwork, where it's kind of like this. And Neil Gaiman in Diamond Age, I believe, and a little bit in the book before Diamond Age, he describes these little tiny clades where you adopt the beliefs of these little kind of tribes, but the tribes are all stacked up on top of each other, and technology allows that to happen. Basically, the advanced technology allows for these like these universal localities, like where you're just a part of the Victorians or you're a part of these different tribes, and you can go from city to city and find the tribe, and they've all figured out relationships between each other, and the technology allows them to defend themselves from other people. But what you're describing is similar to what Yarvin was describing about these patchworks, these localities. And if you have the right belief system, more or less, or the right look, more or less, you can fit in. You can move from, I guess, Seattle to New York and find your tribe there. But whoever's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
making the broader decisions, I guess, is the question. And I wonder if it's even something that we need to worry about, like the federal government, because I don't see Trump, I don't see MAGA outlasting Trump. I don't know where it's going to go from there. I mean, J.D. Vance is kind of straddles the line between the Christian-ish, national-ishists and then the tech bros, right? But as soon as
yeah,
Trump gained dominance and woke classic tanked, tons of infighting started to happen within the MAGA realm. And that's
yeah.
where you see
In
all this
many,
Israel and anti-Israel or Israel skeptical
yeah,
stuff, fractures appearing on the right.
yeah. In many ways, the social contract MAGA offered America is okay, we'll give you the domestic policies, but you have to let Israel do what it wants. That's the social contract.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that that is a more tolerable social contract than what the Democrats offer you, which is essentially just die, die
Mm-hmm.
or castrate yourself. But the thing is, if you're like me and you actually have a consciousness, you or that's not the right. If you have a conscience that tells you to not do deals with the devil, MAGA's social contract is intolerable because your
Mm.
Christian brothers and sisters are dying in certain areas, and you actually care about these people you share the faith. Like I care about Christians in Lebanon and Palestine, and I even care about the Muslims a little bit because I shouldn't say a little bit. I view them as human beings. I think they have human worth. Any social contract that says I have to overlook the human worth of someone, I don't like. Even with the again, like with the extreme, sure, I want like illegal aliens deported. I don't want them rounded up like animals. I want them gently. I would prefer them to be
Mm.
gently returned by policy. Like I said, if you demand if you were demanding illegal aliens were paid the same as American citizens, every company would want illegals gone and they would self-deport because the entire financial motivation would be gone. You wouldn't have to hurt anyone. You wouldn't have to abuse anyone. You would, it's a very Catholic human value approach to this problem that would self-regulate itself. I'm Catholic. I believe every human being has worth, and I don't want to suffer these murder fantasies that you see in the far left and far right.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have overlapping goals with things that the left and right have, but I don't want to sign a social contract that demands I deny someone's human value. I don't like that. That goes against my beliefs,
Yeah.
and it is hard to say that because I know people on both the right and left who are going to call me a sellout for saying that, but I'm sorry, I take my faith seriously. I read the
Mm.
catechism as a work of a religious authority, and I do believe everybody has human value because they're made in the image of God. If I think that illegal aliens are
Mm.
bad, it's usually because of not liking slave labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer to live in a country that looks more homogenous, maybe. But the thing is, yeah, I have plenty of friends from different ethnic backgrounds that came here legally and worked their asses off to get here, and so I do value those people as honest Americans.
Mm.
Even if I agree that yeah, an American is probably going to be like, an Anglo-Saxon or something, that doesn't mean I don't want to say that there's an extended American family, the same way that the Roman family included Brits and Gauls and other groups that were loyal to the Roman Empire.
Mm.
What part of the Roman Empire outlasted the empire? It was Gaul. Gaul outlived Italy in terms of the Roman Empire because
Mm.
it actually valued the Roman system. It actually tried to preserve the Roman system. I could go at
Mm.
length about how
Yeah.
um, this might be a slight tangent. It might be relevant, but I've written articles about this. But um, why do you think that when the Germans crossed the Rhine in 406 AD, why didn't the Romans send legions to stop it?
The lack of will, or
Oh,
what?
well,
I think
so
you're gonna be able to be
there's
smarter about that
yeah.
question than me.
Well, I'll send you on DMs this very good thesis from the 70s by Charles Paul Minor III. Um, he points out that when Julius Caesar conquered Gaul in 40 BC something or another, he did something unique that never happened again, as far as I'm aware, in the Roman Empire. He permitted the local aristocratic class to keep owning the land. Typically, when Rome conquered something, they gave the land to Romans, to senators.
Mm.
They you know, it was a land grab typically. In Gaul, the exception was that Julius Caesar, he said, okay, Gallic aristocrats, I'm going to make you senators and let you keep your land if you vote for my stuff in the Senate. So he expanded the Roman Senate, made the Gallic elite senators, and then he allowed them to keep their land. As a result of this political machination,
Mm.
centuries later, when the Germans invaded Gaul in 406 AD, I think it was like 30,000 Germans crossed the Rhine on a frozen New Year's Day or something like that. I forget. Uh, the Roman Senate looked at the situation, realized the Italian senators, we don't own any land in Gaul. We don't get any taxes out of Gaul at our individual level. Sure, the Roman taxes at an imperial level taxes Gaul, but at a personal level, the senators do not have any financial incentive
Yeah.
to care about Gaul. So they decided, why would we send legions to protect land we don't own? Even though it's part of the empire, we senators do not own any land there. And
Hmm.
so they let Gaul burn. The funny thing is, Gaul, recognizing that the Roman Empire was not going to send any legions to protect them, they elected their own local emperor, a usurper, to raise up legions and defend them.
Hmm.
Only when Gaul elected a usurper to raise up legions to defend them, then the Roman Senate voted to send legions, not to fight the barbarians, but to fight the usurper.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and so you see in this a certain degree of political machinations with like internal conflict within the Roman Empire. The Gauls actually believed in Roman virtue. The Roman
Hmm.
senators by the late Empire, the Italian senators did not believe in Roman virtue. They believed in power. And as a result of this, uh, I mean, long-term consequences. 4 years after the Germans crossed the border, they sacked Rome itself. So it didn't work out for them in the long run. But what part of the Roman Empire survived the Roman Empire? What part of the Roman Empire outlived the Roman Empire? It was Gaul. Gaul who
Hmm.
actually believed in Roman virtue, which is interesting. So going back to what I was saying before, I
Hmm.
actually I actually do tend to have a kind of liberal view of America. Who is an American? It's someone who cares about America as a history, as a narrative. Even if
Hmm.
I agree, like even if I agree ethnically, yeah, Americans are Anglo-Saxon type of people. I'm not going to limit the definition of an American citizen to that. I'm going to limit it to people that actually care and fight for this country. It's kind of like
Hmm.
the difference between yeah, there's an American ethnicity and there's also an American citizenship, and in the sense that there's a Roman citizen, a Roman ethnicity. They're not necessarily the same thing. It may be a little too liberal for most people, but I do tend to think that way.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I do differentiate between who's an American citizen and who's an American ethnic wise. Like I'm Irish and Greek and Italian. I'm not really an American ethnically. I don't think of myself as American ethnically. I do think of myself American politically.
Hmm.
But I also recognize I'm not an ethnic American. Like if we define the ethnicity of America, yeah, it's a bunch of Anglo-Saxons who came here and kind of merged with the indigenous brutality to some degree. Um, the Native Americans taught the American colonists the art of savagery, and that's what differentiates
Hmm.
them from the English in England. You can't say an American ethnically wise is the same as an as an English person in England. Even though they share a common heritage, the American has undergone a certain ethnogenesis by living amongst the savages that makes them different than the English. It makes them a
Yeah.
little bit more brutal. It makes them a little bit more hard along the edges.
Yeah.
They're and in many ways in the Roman Empire you have that too. Um, in 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 for example the Romanians. The Romanians are descended of Latin people that moved east during the barbarian incursions, and they lived amongst the Slavic savages. There's a certain brutality in Romania that you don't find in Italy, even though they have a common ancestry.
Hmm. So you brought up Roman values being stronger in Gaul than in Rome. You also, well, I'm just wondering about American values. And you also brought up the European Union kind of, or even the British government, the leftist governments kind of going harder against immigration because they realize that their stock won't fight for them, won't do what they say. So I'm just wondering, is there an American values? Like, what does that consist of? Is there something worth keeping America for?
That's a hard question as a Catholic because in many ways those values are not really aligned with Catholic values. Because
Hmm.
America as a value system is a very personal, sovereign, independent minded, like you're the king of your own castle kind of thing. Which does come from a certain degree of the English concept that like every Englishman is a lord of his own household. Um, there's a certain degree of American values that it was useful when we were a smaller population and a less developed country.
Hmm.
And those values may not be as useful or at the forefront of the America of today. An America that is now very developed, like highly developed. It has very dense areas, and it's break. In many ways, America is breaking down into again a number of ethno-localities. Um, and so there may need to be a reevaluation of what America is. Even if like the right wing fantasy happened and every brown person was deported, you wouldn't be able to change the fact that regions of this country that are white no longer have overlapping values. That they
Hmm.
have bifurcated.
Yeah.
The values of a Californian white person do not align with the values of a Oklahoma white person or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
That
And the California
there
would be
has
the first one to tell you that.
yeah, there there has been a ethnogenesis within America at the ethno-local area.
Hmm.
In the same way you can no longer say an American is an Englishman, you can no longer say a Californian and a Georgian or something like that. They're not really the same people necessarily, even if they live underneath the same federal government. And in
Yeah.
many ways, America was founded with a certain kind of confederation mindset, where
Hmm.
the 13 states were understood to have a certain degree of already having undergone ethnogenesis in the centuries that they had been there as British colonies.
Hmm.
Um, and in many
Yeah, but
ways,
their
that was
early federal government didn't hate its population to
exactly.
like a tenth or a percentage degree as the current federal government hates the current population.
Yes, I would argue that the genesises, the plural form, whatever it would be,
Genocide, genocide.
genocide.
Oh,
Yeah,
too far.
no, the 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 ethnogenesis that had undergone in each of the 13 colonies was in many ways swept under the rug between, I would argue, 1860 to 1960. 100 years it
Hmm.
was swept under the rug. Because Lincoln needed a strong central federal government, and the Reconstruction era tried to suppress any argument against it. And then America still needed a strong central definition of an American through World War One and World War Two. And then
Hmm.
in the 1960s, the left started questioning that, saying, "Oh, there's a Black America and a White America. There's a Mexican America and a Anglo America." It was the
Yeah.
left that started. In many ways, it was the left that started reintroducing that Confederate idea, ironically. And well, it may not be ironic because I like pointing this out sometimes. Did you know that the Confederate States during the Civil War, they were actually less white than we are today?
Because of all the slaves, or actually
Yeah,
something
yeah.
more than
No,
that?
because of the slaves. Yeah, because
Yeah.
of the slaves. That like the America of the Confederate States were something like 50 or 40, something like 55% white, and the rest was all either African, Latino, or Native American. So
Hmm.
so we've already had an experiment in the Confederate model of a diverse America in the form of the Confederate States. And it failed to compete against the central identity of the Union, the single America concept, the Union, the unconfederated America. It
Mm.
lost to that, but that America of the 1860s, the Yankees that won the Civil War, that has died. So the America of today, the United States of today, looks more like the Confederacy than the Union in 1860 in
Mm.
demographic terms, in political terms, in structural terms.
Hmm.
And so you kind of have to ask, is what are the American values that you're going to go with into the future? Are you going to keep doing this Confederation style and give up on the Yankee model,
Yeah.
the Union, the
Mm.
or are you going to try to reinforce the Union? Are you going to try to reintegrate the Union, reconstruct the nation back into it. Because in many ways, America needs, if you want to do the Yankee model from the 1860s, you have to do national reconstruction. And that will inevitably create national crises.
Oh, national reconstruction.
Yeah.
That, well, I mean, that's denazification. That's what it
Yeah, yeah.
is.
But it's not just denazification, right? Yeah, the function, the structure of what you do is that. Yeah, yeah. Denazification is just a more advanced form of Reconstructionism in the South. Like America, the Union practiced this thing in the South after the Civil War. Then once it got good at it, it applied it to the Europe after World War II. They're
Yep.
streamless. Um, if you want to return to the Union, the Federated Union of the post-Civil War America, the victors of the Civil War, the only choice that you have in the book of tools that has proven to work is Reconstructionism, is denazification, but it has to go further. It has to be like communification. You have to like erase and deconstruct both the communists and the fascists in this country, and you have to completely obliterate them and destroy them as ethnic identities in this country. So like you'd have to have federal troops come into your West Washington town and rip down the
Hmm.
rainbow flags and destroy all the ethnolocalism that happened there, in as
Mm-hmm.
much as they have to go to like the boomer MAGA town in Texas and rip down the MAGA flags, rip down all that. It would be like the scale and willpower you need to do that doesn't currently exist, right? You would have to
Yeah.
first, again, going back to what I said earlier, you would have to first terraform a significant part of the United States noosphere back to the thinking of the Union after the Civil War in order to even attempt that. And we don't have that. All of America is now a Confederate style governing where there are local laws, local polities, they have local jurisdiction. It
Yeah.
already is kind of like Moldberg's patchwork.
Yeah.
And it has been since Biden. Trump is attempting in almost like a
Hmm.
almost like Justinian the Great. He's attempting to terraform. What did Justinian the Great do? He attempted to terraform Western Europe, the new sphere, back into the Roman era, and he was not that successful. It only
What
lasted for a
what
few
year? What
centuries.
era was he in? Justinian the Great.
I think this was that the 600s or so, the Gothic
Okay.
Wars.
Okay.
Maybe I might be off 100 years or so, but
Okay.
he's successfully terraformed the new sphere of like Italy and Spain and North Africa for about 300 years before it
Hmm.
failed, and the medieval new sphere returned over to what he had terraformed and reinforced the medieval norms.
Yeah.
So the before you even go about Reconstructionism, you would have to first terraform the cities of this country to be homogeneously American in thinking,
Yeah.
in unity.
Yeah.
It can no longer be, oh, America is the Rainbow Coalition or America is the MAGA Coalition. That is those are members of the defined, Confederate
Yeah.
states. Like
Yeah.
each of those is a Confederate state. You have to create something new, federal, united, and homogenous, ex nihilo in many ways. You have to
Mm.
invent it out of thin air, and then you have to enforce it in areas that you can spread your power from. The amount of violence and power you have to do that, the country doesn't have it. So it's going to be a. I'm not, at least I'm not convinced it has it. So you are stuck with
No.
the Confederate model.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think. So there's the Revolutionary War, and then there's expansions, the kind of the early Wild West, and then the Civil War, and then the later Wild West, and then you have the Progressive Era, where there's a centralized kind of
Yeah.
bureaucratization that kind of swept across America, and because everything got standardized, and then that was all cemented by World War II, and we've been running on the fumes of World War II, and I think we can regress back to a patchwork Wild West. We still have America still has within its identity, its mythic identity, a independence-minded Wild West kind of thing where we're kind of amidst the savages, like the liberals are amidst the savages, and the MAGAs are amidst the savages in the liberal domains. So that could work,
Yeah.
but that's not a homogenous society, and I don't see a civil war happening, and I don't see a world war happening, like in like a hot conflict. I don't think that happened. I think there's, like, in the future, there's probably economic wars, which hopefully we can avoid.
Yeah.
But I don't think an economic war has the power, the mythological power of a World War II. And
What
we're not send our young men to fight in Ukraine or in Israel. I mean, we can like Israel can get away with like namby-pambying or
Yeah.
paying off our Ted Cruzes and stuff, but they can't actually command us to actually like invest all of our youth into whatever they would want us to do. I don't know, like go into the Middle East or anything. I mean, that's shot. I mean, Bush kind of like thankfully ruined that.
Yeah.
Whatever juice was
Uh,
there to squeeze.
what you're describing right now is the start of a dark age. Um,
Oh,
because that was the same problem Western Europe had when the imperial power started crippling. You
mm,
know, Justinian tried to hold back that dark age, and for a few centuries he did, but the dark age proved too strong for his terraforming attempts. And eventually it came all the way into the east, and it was just Anatolia and Greece, and that was all that was left for a few centuries before the Turks replaced. I don't like saying the Turks conquered the Ottoman Empire. The Crusaders conquered the Ottoman. Sorry, I don't like saying that the Turks conquered the Byzantine Empire. The Crusaders conquered the Byzantine Empire. The Turks just cleaned up the mess. Um,
yeah,
and so if you're viewing it more like a dark age, which I do, I too don't think that there is any political capital or will for a civil war, for a world war, for any of these grand organized
yeah,
projects. It's not there. There's not enough political capital to create that. That means you're heading into a dark age where the federal central power just continues to diminish into local rump states.
yeah.
And then so like
Hmm.
how did the Dark Ages end in Europe? Which I would argue I'm a Dark Age skeptic. I kind of view it as just a natural
Was it all
uh
that dark,
de
really?
uh dark in terms of documented history, but even if you look hard enough, you'll find quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Letters of Sidenius are my favorite little Dark Age literature. But
Hmm.
so how did the decentralization in late antiquity stop? How did the rump states of the Roman Empire stop the decline and engineer a new kind of, you want to say, like neutral homogeneous power from which to govern the Confederates with, right?
Hmm.
Um, you had basically what you had is the Catholic Church was like pretty much the last ligament of the Roman imperial system left,
Hmm.
and they is oh, just to go into a little history. Sorry to nerd out on some
No,
fun
no,
history facts
please,
with you.
please do.
Um, the Dark Ages are my Roman. How often does a man talk about the Roman Empire? For me, it's how often can I talk about the Dark Ages? The
Yeah,
Dark Ages are my Roman Empire.
yeah.
So during late antiquity, when the Franks took over Gaul, the Merovingians were a useless dynasty. They were useful to a degree, but what basically, do you know what the Maora Palatini are? I might be saying it wrong. The Domo Meo Domo. The
No.
Meo Domo the Meo Domo was a role in the Gaul post-Roman Gaul government who was almost always held by a Romanized Gaul, and he was the kind of like the prime minister that ran the country with the king, the Merovingian king. And over time, the Merovingian kings essentially became nothing more than local rock stars. They would roll into town, do some like arts and dueling and like fun stuff that gets the people up and uppity and like feeling like they're still in a civilization.
Hmm.
And there's a quote there was a quote I think by I don't remember which medieval scholar, but at the end of the Merovingian dynasty, he was, to paraphrase, he was merely a wavy golden hair frolicking popularis who would ride on his chariot to the people's adornment and go home to his manor every day.
Hmm.
Like he was a rock.
Hmm.
They were rock stars. They were basically just like rock stars propped up by the real power, the mayordomos, who actually ran the country. And the mayordomos were just Romans. They were just Romans governing under the guise of a system people liked because no one liked the Roman Empire anymore. There's a quote in Charles Parlementer the Third's thesis I mentioned. I forget where it's from, but he says like that there's this point in which the Gauls no longer wanted to be Roman subjects, but they still wanted Roman virtue. And his quote
Hmm.
is they had begun at last to despair the Republic. I find that quote very poignant. It's very
Hmm.
pointed. It's like they
Hmm.
had at last, like at long last, they had despaired the very idea of Rome. And at that
Hmm.
point, the Gallic people became loyal to the Goths and the Franks that were ruling them in situ with the Roman Empire. So
Okay.
the Mayordomos, these Roman bureaucrats, still ran Gaul, but they would just roll out this rock star blonde-haired goth like a beauty boy to like
Hmm.
rally the people. It was like rallying the people behind this like cultural icon while they actually the Gaul itself.
Yeah.
So what happened is that the Mayordomos over time, the Franks wed and bred with the Romanized Gaul, and you had this like kind of like mixed aristocracy that was fairly homogenous. They were all basically a little bit of Frank, a little bit of Roman, a little bit of Gaul. They kind of had like this shared mixed heritage. And they started talking to the Pope, and they were like, "Listen, Pope, we know that in God's divine institutions, the king is appointed by God to govern us, and you are you officiate the king, Pope. You crown the king. That's your role. This is like we get it, but it's been about 200 years of the Merovingians. They pretty much just party in the pubs and don't do anything. Really, we're the king. Where the Mayordomos, our institution, we're really the king
Hmm.
in actual practicality. So we think you should find a really good Mayordomo, someone who's popular with the people, like the Merovingians, but he's a Mayordomos. He's a prime minister of Gaul. So he's got the real power and the will of the people. If you could somehow merge this, you'd have an actual government you could do things with. And
Hmm.
the Pope starts thinking, yeah, I see your argument. And so the Mayordomos and the Vatican kind of conspire to invent a
Hmm.
person, a someone who is both popular and has power, and that person manifested in Charles Martel. Charles Martel is like this folk hero. He's popular with the people because he's winning battles against the Moors invading from the south, and he's defeating the Saxons. He's pretty good at war. He's pretty good at power, and he's popular amongst the people like a rock star. And so the Mayordomos are like he becomes the Mayordomos. He's granted the role of Mayordomos, and then I think his son Pepin or someone uh they go to the Pope like I think it's time we merge the the king, the role of king and the role of Mayordomos into a single governing entity, like a single institution. And the Vatican says, I agree, I think it's time. So ex nihilo, they declare that the Mayordomos is also the Rex Romanum. They're one institution in the same. And that's when I think Pepin or someone, he becomes the official king of France. France becomes this political entity. Well, really, it's like the early days of the Carlomannian dynasty. And then
Hmm.
Pepin's son is Charlemagne. And Charlemagne comes in, and he's a really good king of France. And so the Pope is like, okay, we got a good government. Now, how about we one up it and declare him emperor so that we can ex nihilo the Roman Empire back into existence, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and that ex nihilo spoken into existence from nothing recreates, the Holy Roman Empire, and that is how the Dark Ages end when the Vatican, the old power and the new power come together and declare this is the binding of these forces into a new central homogeneous like neutral government. He can't claim to be Roman, he can't claim to be French, he can't claim to be German. He's kind of all, and he's unified into this single new federal neutral power from which he can rule the confederates of various Germans and Latins and French and Goths, and be this like new federal power. So to bring a long-winded argument back, who, in your opinion, fulfills the role as someone who bridges the various confederates of America that could stand as a neutral new federal power base to grow from?
AOC?
Maybe, but like, how is she going to win over the conservative confederates?
Yeah. Well, we right now we don't have the Vatican. We have Hollywood, and Hollywood's rapidly declining. So I mean, but the role of the spiritual myth makers and promulgators were traditionally it's traditionally the media that, but that's breaking up. But I could see that that's a vector through which power could be cemented. But I don't see how you tie the knot between MAGA and the Rainbow Coalition. I don't see how, maybe over generations, maybe it really depends on what happens with the next generation and the blowback to the lockdowns that they experienced growing up in school and the COVID
Yeah.
hysteria. And where that leads them towards or away from power, how that formulates either a deep skepticism or a deep desire for proper power, right?
Yeah, no, I do agree with you that we probably don't know yet. But in the same way that this process that I'm describing in France, it took about 4 or 5 generations of gradually consolidating between different arms. We
Yeah,
do see, we're starting to see some of those dynasties form. AOC amongst the progressives, and
yeah,
um, you know, there are certain progressives that let's say the new right, the woke right, if you will, they can tolerate her. And there are also certain right-wing forces that the new left, the woke left, they can tolerate them. Um,
hmm.
I wouldn't necessarily say someone like JD Vance. He kind of bridges a different set of Confederates, like you said before, the tech
Yeah,
and the MAGA. He bridges some Confederates. AOC bridges some Confederates. These are kind of
hmm.
local. They're local dynasties beginning to form that can bridge some of the Confederates.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same way that Gaul needed this like rock star, apolitical rallying figure the Gaul needed the Merovingians for a few decades in order to prepare the way for the Carolinians. Without the Merovingians, the Carolinians could not bridge the Latins, the Gauls, the Goths, and the Franks, and all these people. It was really this rock star figure that managed to taper down some of the deep hurts and divisions from the fall of the Roman Empire, and kind
Yeah.
of bring everybody to a period where they could actually look to how they could be governed together. So America needs, in many ways, this rock star figure that could bridge the left and right. God help me, Elon Musk had the possibility, but boy, did he burn that bridge so badly. Like 4 years
Man.
ago, like maybe 6 years ago, he had that possibility. He had it, but he burned it down really fast.
Yeah.
So in many
I
ways,
wonder
the
why. Probably just autism or whatever that means.
drugs, drugs, I think just
Yeah.
drugs.
Huh.
Um, so you kind of had a false dawn. You know the term false dawn. This like it's someone who shows the archetype you're looking for but fails to live up to it. Musk was a false dawn of this Merovingian figure, and now you have to
Hmm.
look for like you have to kind of you now see the archetype, so you at least know what kind of
Hmm.
figure you're looking. It's going to be someone who's environmentally conscious, big
Yeah.
on tech,
Yeah.
entertains the spicy memes, but isn't hateful.
Yeah.
Someone of that vague, like that's something like a vague idea of the archetype that the environment is calling for, so someone will eventually fit that mold, but it, the current people trying to fit that mold that they failed. They've collapsed. The
Hmm.
it wasn't a the clay didn't dry. It collapsed.
Yeah.
So there's at least a vague notion of what kind of archetype is going to be the Merovingian figure for a few decades before you can get a Carlinian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whoever can get young people house ownership,
Yeah.
that would be one vector of solidifying power. And I wonder why nobody is talking about that. And just like the housing market is just not, doesn't seem like it's politically talked about by the people who are in power. I don't know why.
hmm Yeah, that is something that continues to be ignored.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't
Curiously.
even know. It is very curious because that would be one of the most stabilizing things that would put to rest the current turmoil if people could
Yeah.
just, if people could at least get a home and have some stability, maybe then they could start getting married and having kids at least. But
Yeah.
but that's not happening right now.
And then have something to fight for. And whoever would,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever governmental structure would provide that would essentially buy the loyalty or earn the loyalty.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why people like the Merovingians and others were so popular is that because they put to rest all the pirates and barbarians and all
Yeah.
that stuff, people could actually, they could actually live on a house and farm. They could
Yeah.
actually live in peace. They
Yeah.
could build something. And we don't have that right now.
Yeah. And the pirates being like the monetary system itself, whoever's
Yeah, yeah,
controlling
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, somewhat related. Are you familiar with the work of what's his name? Marco Evaristi from like
No.
the late 90s, early 2000s. He had a very controversial gallery piece in I think Denmark. You might be more familiar with the art than the man.
Mm-hmm.
He put he put on a gallery exhibit several blenders, and then in the blenders he put goldfish, and
Mm.
he just left them there for people to decide, are you going to blend the fish or not,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And and so he just sat and waited, and eventually someone did press the button, and it caused a public uproar. He got charged with animal cruelty and everything. The charges were dropped because it's
Huh.
just a
Yeah.
goldfish. But it was a kind of transgressive piece of art because one of the things you could do is like, well, what's the difference between what he did and going and watching fish get killed at a sushi place, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the functional difference? There's nothing. In both situations, you go to watch fish get
Well,
slaughtered
did
and
the
eat, and then you
person
eat
who
them.
blended the goldfish drink the juice? Because that's the
No, no,
functional difference.
that's true. He didn't eat it.
Okay.
So, but it begs the question: why do we care about the goldfish? And not the fish at the sushi you see get slaughtered?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you treat it spiritually different when materially it's very similar? No, yeah, you're not
Mm-hmm.
drinking the goldfish, okay, but um, he argued that the exhibit displayed three kinds of people: the voyeur, the moralist, and the sadist. The
Mm.
sadist presses the button. The voyeur watches and gets something out of it. And the moralist is like, why is this here at all? Right? This
Yeah.
is amoral.
Yeah.
And in many ways, we're in an era where there are a lot of voyeurists. They're waiting for someone to press the political button of
Mm.
change. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of moralists who don't want the button to exist at all. But
Mm-hmm.
we don't have any sadists, the people willing to press the political button
Hmm.
to like do something.
Are you sure
Uh,
about that?
well, there are certainly people that say they're going to press the button and change the system, but they never
Okay.
actually go through with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that isn't talked about this exhibit that was even the artist doesn't talk about this. There were members of the press who were told that this exhibit was going to happen, And they went to the gallery and they actively egged people on to press it. They
Hmm.
wanted the story. They wanted the
Mm-hmm.
story.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the oversights of the artist, he didn't write about it. It's just something that's been observed. There is a fourth category of the people that egg on pressing the button because they want, they're kind of spiritually sadists, but they're not. They're too chicken shit to be the sadist, right?
Yeah.
And and so in many ways, the media in this position, you can almost frame this art as a kind of like mini demonstration of the religious system, right? The liberal democracy is everybody at the
Hmm.
gallery. They're all kind of voting, right? The priests are actually the media egging on doing the thing. And
Hmm.
they're like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna be popular and cool if you do this thing, right? You're gonna be notorious." And
Hmm.
but like it's a weird system because like there's no actual the priest that's being asked to conduct it is like kind of almost being democratically elected by the liberal democracy, by the
Hmm.
mob, but also it's kind of the priests, the media in the sense that are egging on like an elected priest, almost like a chief priest that they're electing from amongst the people. I
Hmm.
I I I like this exhibit because it kind of demonstrates a small cosmos of the problems of liberal democracy, where even if the choice exists, it's usually egged on by certain factors you don't notice or read about until later on.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and this is potentially an example of what's going to come in like an in between state between liberal democracy, whatever comes next, where you get like the priests are no longer willing to conduct the ceremony, but to like make liberal democracy work, but they're egging on someone to keep the system going a little bit longer. But
Hmm.
it's just something to bring up. I kind of view people
Hmm.
like MAGA almost kind of like the voyeurs, where they're like really attracted to like clowning on the left, if you will. Their entire
Hmm.
political existence seems to be how can we piss the left off today?
Yeah.
And there are left wingers like that too. Like how can we piss the chuds off today? That exists in the left as well. But the left in many ways is the moralizers who are like, why does this exist? Oh, woe is me. Why did this happen? Oh, won't
Hmm.
someone get rid of this priest for me? Kind of like, Shakespearean.
Hmm.
And the sadist, the one that's actually willing to do it, who in many ways is, if he's not a priest, he's like a elected priest almost. I don't know who that is yet. That figure hasn't emerged yet.
Hmm. I just, America's so big. We talk about these things, and no matter how accurate we are, we're always kind of. I don't think I. It's very rare to hear somebody like speaking with the full weight of just how much is riding on this particular goldfish. Like I don't know, like the debt, however you would collapse the analogy into like a current issue.
Yeah.
But Israel, Epstein, the debt, the housing market, all these markets, you know, whether it's humane to it's inhumane to not trans a kid or inhumane to trans a kid. The state of our Supreme Court with that Jackson lady delegitimizing it by just being there and just being so incompetent at the job, just delegitimizing the court, which I think is probably her primary function. Yeah, I don't see how it collapses, but I guess it just does. Is that what
Yeah,
happens? It just
I would,
does.
I would, it's, there's no single point in history where we can say now the Roman Empire died. Now
Yeah,
there's no
right.
longer a Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But we all instinctively know, the movies that exist in the Roman era and the movies that exist in the medieval era. There's an aesthetic difference
Yeah.
always. Even
Yeah.
even if we can't, you know, people sometimes say, "Oh, it's when Rome was sacked in 410," but the Roman Empire continued on. There was still an emperor. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, there were still generals in parts of the Western Empire saying that they were like um the Dux Africanus per Imperium, the count, the Duke of Africa of the Empire, without any named Roman emperor. they had no Roman emperor to name because there wasn't one in the West
Hmm.
anymore. But
Hmm.
they still said they would say they were serving the emperor who doesn't exist. It was like there's no singular point in time where you can say now the Roman Empire doesn't exist because mimetically it just kept existing seamlessly transitioning into states like France or the Holy Roman Empire
Yeah.
where or the Holy
Yeah.
Roman Empire wasn't really a state but like yeah it
Yeah.
just kind of gradually became a new thing. It decentralized and then it re-centralized around new power centers. And I do agree. I don't see how there's going to be like oh now the American empire is over. Now liberal democracy is over. I don't think there's going to be a single point in time when we can say that that was when it died. There's just going to be a day when we realize oh we don't actually we don't actually have a federal government anymore. Now we have this and that, and it's just gonna like happen. It won't be like noticed. It won't be spoken about or recorded. People might pick specific dates when it
Hmm.
started or when it
Hmm.
ended, but it
Yeah.
but it won't really like ever. It like you're gonna be blue balling yourself if you're looking forward to that day because you're never
Yeah.
gonna see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I just even that, like trying to run that thought experiment, where would all the funding not go? How would all these things that rely on the federal government just cease to exist? How would I mean, even if we took out the NGO industry, like the shadow government, right? The government, the part of the government that tells the government what to do, that's supposed to supposedly not a part of the government, which isn't the voters, it's the NGO complex. Like, how would that just not be there? I guess I could see like a technological reorientation around people like with enough, massing enough money and then paying people well enough to establish kind of localities or at least, or even just like kind of another patchwork of like businesses or corporations and stuff, but they would have to be providing a service. And anything that they're providing right now, I mean, Musk is what he's doing. I guess it's not military stuff that he's doing with the cars and then with the AI stuff and then the robotic stuff, which is really creepy to me.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't get around that. And then the SpaceX stuff. So he's got like
I
he's got his hands in all these different places that could potentially be like a new empire if it was like crystallized in a way.
I think it's important to categorize empires into
Hmm.
how they work. So Rome was a martial empire. So action took form in military action.
Yeah.
America is a mercantile empire. So action takes place in economic
Hmm.
and bureaucratic changes.
Hmm.
Things like closing U.S. aids and stuff like that. Those are functionally equivalent to the sack of Rome. It's not with militaries, but it's functionally the same thing.
Hmm.
You have to understand like the difference between form and function in this sense. Like everybody's looking for the barbarians coming and sacking Rome, like happening in Washington D.C. But we're a mercantile empire, so it's not going to happen like Goths raiding it. It's going to happen in the
Yeah.
form of closing down departments,
Yeah.
stealing funds, moving stuff around. That is a sack. You witnessed a sack, and in the same way that when Biden came in, he also sacked Washington of the older and Obama too. Like there's been multiple sacks of Washington D.C. It just wasn't fiery and brimstone. It was with
Hmm.
sometimes it was fiery and brimstone with riots, but it was
Hmm.
more economic. So like when Obama comes in and he basically takes all of the old guard from the Nixon era, the the Bush one era, all of
Yeah.
those old guard like intelligence assets, they get kicked out of DC and the new assets come in from the Rainbow
Hmm.
Coalition. That's a
Yeah.
sack. That is a sack of the Capitol. It may not be fiery and brimstone, it may not involve troops, but it's a sack. When
Yeah.
Biden comes in, when Trump comes in and tries to do it, it's not so much a sack. He doesn't really do it good in this first term. But what Trump is doing now, it's a sack. He's sacking the Capitol. He's taking assets away the same way Alaric did. Alaric came in. A fun fact: when Alaric sacked Rome in 410, did you know that it's thought nobody died?
In the sack of
Do you know?
Rome.
Yeah, and at least the
in that
410 sack
particular
of Rome,
one?
nobody,
Yeah.
yeah, nobody actually died in that one. There's like one recorded old lady that was unwilling to give up her pocketbook, and so some goths got angry and shoved her accidentally, or not accidentally, they shoved her to get the money, and then she fell over and broke her neck. And that
Okay.
was the only that was the only recorded death in the sack of Rome of 410.
Hmm.
What happened? What happened is that Alaric walked in. He called a meeting with the Pope and the Senate, and he said, "Listen, my soldiers need money." Alaric was a foederati of the Roman Empire. He wasn't really a foreign barbarian. He was a military asset of the Roman Empire. Rome hadn't paid him for a while, so he went to Rome. Was like, "Listen, I'm going to tell you how you're going to pay me because you can't. Obviously, you can't. You're broke. You're going to take the gold on the old pagan temples and the statues and the roof. You're going to melt it down into coins, and you're going to give me that. That's how you're going to pay my soldiers." And that's what the Senate and Vatican did. They took the gold off the old pagan temples that were mostly abandoned. They paid Alaric, and he fucked off. So
Hmm.
nobody actually died in that sack. It was
Hmm.
actually one of the most un. It was actually like it was a literal mostly peaceful protest by
Yeah.
Alaric. And
But
and
power
so
didn't change in his wake, right?
no, it
Like
didn't.
those
It
all
didn't.
the yeah, okay. Yeah.
Power stayed the same way. It was just a sack. It was a raid of Rome. When Trump came in and destroyed U.S. aids and is closing down State Department assets and firing people at FBI, all that stuff. He's sacking the capital. He's removing political capital from his enemies and building political capital for his forces. It is a sack of the capital. It's the third sack we've had in the last couple of decades. People don't realize it because it's not violent like they think about in and even what they think about in the Dark Ages wasn't even that bad to start with. The real sack of
Hmm.
Rome that was destructive. That was in 455 with the Vandals. They actually killed people. But
Hmm.
if you view the line of decadent emperors doing this to Washington D.C., like the decadent presidents, you can view them as sacks of a late empire crippling
Hmm.
political capital. In the act of robbing political capital and dispensing it to their assets, they're actually in the act destroying federal power and the ability to do any of these like wide overarching changes to save the republic. When Trump is gone and someone else takes over, whether it's Vance or Newsom or whoever it is, they will have less capital to do things than Obama because the capital has been sacked several times.
Hmm.
They no longer have it's almost like, I'm not saying don't be afraid if they get into power, but they're not going to have the means by which to do anything when
Yeah.
they're in power. You've
That's
already, yeah.
good. I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, potentially had Kamala won, we would have gone back to 2020 levels potentially of maybe they wouldn't have, but of repression of speech and of surveillance, heightening surveillance, and then persecution of political enemies. Maybe they wouldn't have as strongly as Biden tried to do, at least rhetorically, with like ultra MAGA they came up with and stuff, all these other cringe terms. But it would have, yeah. But Trump having gone in there and untying those things, it's really hard to tie those things back together. Not that you can't tie those things back together or reformulate, more U.S. aid or whatever, because power wants to centralize, right? The federal
Yeah,
government
yeah.
wants to persist as an entity, so it would be okay with growing a
Yeah,
few extra limbs.
if and when that particular branch of the Democrats come into power, they will attempt to persecute and do those things. I'm not convinced they're going to be effective at it. Um, you already saw that under Biden, where states like Florida and Texas were essentially
Yeah,
pseudo on us. They were pseudo
yeah,
autonomous. They were just not following the federal law.
yeah.
I mean, now the Democrats tried that when Trump started doing deportations, and unlike his first term, he rolled in the Marines, and so he's at least
Mm,
whoever's telling them to do stuff is a lot more hardline now and radical than in
mm,
his first term. So in a certain sense, I view Trump something like a Justinian figure, where he is um attempting to terraform the American noosphere into something like 80s,
mm,
90s America. I'm not convinced it's going to last very long. However,
mm,
he's attempting to recreate that ecosystem in certain areas that have been like lost from the American federal government essentially.
Yeah.
Um, Again, as a Justinian figure, I'm not convinced he can actually
Well, you'd have to
accomplish
have the Pope
much.
on his side. You have to have the Pope on your side, and
Yeah,
that's media. And media is having a crisis right now. Like the late stage woke media is, it's having a crisis. So we'll see how they reform, and if there is a direction that has the power, somebody can. That's what you need. Somebody who can recapture the power of American myth making, and that would have to go
yeah,
through media. And the Trump win, if you look at the podcast circuit and how that dovetailed with his second or third win, depending on how you're counting.
yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of potential political capital in these podcast stuff. I don't know how that translates into movie making, but that's a really powerful. That's the Catholic Church of America. Like that's like you need that in order to reformulate or to instigate
I
an ethnogenesis. Do you
I I
you
I
don't?
would argue that I would argue that things like podcasting are something like a Protestant Reformation within this religious structure because it's like breaking down
It's
like the
deconstructed.
centralized.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pamphlet wars. Yeah,
in many ways, podcasters are like the Luthers to like the media, old media, Vatican. In many
yeah,
ways,
yeah, yeah.
whether what which again that makes it fundamentally left wing from a broader perspective.
Hmm.
But from a material perspective, yes, it's right wing from the American what colors they paint on their political factions.
Yeah.
But in terms of like function, in terms of like broader perspective, these are kind of like decentralizing left wing events of a right wing. I really need
Why?
a better
Because they
word
are
than right and left
appealing
wing.
to rationality. They're appealing to some sort of universal humanity, like some
No,
sort of like shared thing outside of the cathedral. How do you mean?
I guess somewhat that it's yeah, it's like offering what it was claimed to be more rational because it's not within the old religious structure. It's not stuffy. It's liberal in the sense of like freeing,
Yeah.
like decentralized.
Yeah.
Again, like that older definition of liberal. It's not the Rainbow Coalition. It's like
Yeah.
just decentralized personal sovereignty, personal
Yeah.
independent thought.
Yeah.
It's a breakdown of that religious structure from you know that right wing political structure. Even if it paints itself left, it functions as a right wing thing.
Hmm.
At least the old media, I'm saying the old media would be like functionally it would be right wing even if it paints itself left.
And please correct me if I'm totally off base here, but Protestantism led the way towards mercantile empires, right?
I would say yes. There were mercantile states
Yeah.
within Christendom, but they operated under like restrictions from the church, right? So they
Yeah.
were controlled and regulated. Something like Venice becomes if Venice had
Yeah.
become Protestant, it would have become a superpower because it would have no constraint.
Oh,
Um,
really? Huh.
well, a good example actually, 'cause Venice, fun fact, Venice. Uh, for most of Venice's history, it called itself a state of the Byzantine Empire. Did you know that?
Of the
Even
Byzantine.
though, yeah,
Huh.
it called itself a Byzantine state, even though it had initially it had an exarch, like a local sovereign, under the wing of the Byzantine emperor, and then throughout Renaissance, throughout the Middle Ages, it operated as a semi-independent Byzantine state. And then when the Fourth Crusade rolled around, they saw an opportunity, and so they joined in on the fun.
Yeah.
In the peace treaty after the Fourth Crusade, if you read it, the Doge of Venice declares himself
Hmm.
emperor of a fourth of the Roman Empire.
Hmm.
So
One
he's
quarter.
the
Huh.
yeah, Doge the Doge takes the title from the overthrown Byzantine emperor. He declares himself emperor of a fourth of the empire.
Okay.
And it's actually referencing their Byzantine history. Venice is reclaiming a certain ancient right over the partitioning of the Byzantine Empire by the Crusader kings,
Okay.
um, and declaring itself a legitimate Roman Empire after the Byzantine Empire is split up by the Crusaders.
Yeah.
And then into the Ottoman era, they declared themselves like the an independent power. And the thing is,
Hmm.
all along the while, they were subject either to the Byzantine or Vatican will for most of the history.
Hmm.
If they were in the brief periods where they didn't really have any oversight or control, when they became a real mercantile empire, they could go at heads with the Ottoman Empire one on one and win. Right?
Hmm.
Like there were times when the Venetians took land from the Ottomans like it was nothing. They were just that powerful as independent. So when they were like
Really?
pseudo, yeah, well,
Like
they
Venice,
took
this
Crete.
tiny little like sinking
Yeah,
island.
yeah,
Huh.
they took Crete, they took Greek islands. They for a while they took parts of Moria, the in Greece. They've had quite a lot of power because as a mercantile empire, they could just buy things that they couldn't
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Um, they were able to do it. There's a lot of history in between, like let's say the 1200s through the 1600s of Venice when it didn't have any oversight and it just went overpowered. It's unbelievable the power that they could wield when they were not constrained. So in many ways, Venice is in many ways a kind of Catholic Protestant empire, functionally Protestant because it has no real Vatican oversight, but still Catholic officially.
Yeah.
And you saw the same. So there is a certain unbridled power that Protestantism allows that it can burn bright, but it kind of lasts half as long. Um,
Hmm.
and
Not a lot of staying
I
power. People don't pledge
no
allegiance
stink.
to the
Yeah,
East India Company, but they'll
exactly.
the families will benefit from it, and you know
Yeah, as long
dress
as
up
they're
their work.
paying, they'll fight for them, but they have no
Yeah.
loyalty to them. So
Yeah.
in many ways, that's why Protestantism is a kind of left-wing entity because it fundamentally comes down to personal sovereignty, personal choice. And again, I'm not judging left or right wing as one's good and one's bad. They just have their appropriate uses. I think as a Catholic, you can balance them better than in the American
Hmm.
style
You
of
guys are the
governance. But
real radical centrists, huh?
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like, you know, again, like I feel like Catholic solutions to problems are typically far superior to the right or left wing solution. Um, but
Well, because
not
it
to shit on that.
orients everything towards worship of God and love of family or something like that.
Something like that, probably. Like, not to get too specific, but
Mm.
it rightly constrains power and rightly uses power.
Hmm.
Unconstrained power can do a lot, but it doesn't last. And too constrained power doesn't do anything and wastes time. It balances power correctly. I think it correctly positions it as a means of glorifying God.
Yeah.
And Protestants from time to time do recreate that relationship. I always point to Presbyterians, the way they treated Tim Keller. Even though Presbyterians don't have bishops, Tim Keller was a bishop. Like
Hmm.
like functionally Tim Keller was a bishop of the Presbyterians. Even though
Why?
they don't
Because it
believe in
was
it.
he was honored and followed. His
Yeah,
counsel
the
was
way in
given
which
biblical, almost biblical weight.
the way in which he executed power was very Catholic. Even if he's not a bishop, he functions as one. So
Okay.
I see that Protestants often recreate Catholic styles of doing things under different names, under different terms.
Hmm.
When America built itself as a central federal government overseeing diverse peoples, it inherently has to act a little Catholic. It has to act,
Hmm.
Catholic meaning universal.
Hmm.
When America was just a government for Anglo-Saxon colonies and their religious dissidents, it was a lot less powerful. It was a lot more decentralized. It was a lot more
Yep. Yep.
uh, at the same time, it was also impressively powerful when it was unbridled, but it never
Yeah.
lasted. Like this colonial entity goes all the way to California in a few decades, but it can't actually like lastingly maintain that power without bridling it under a federal authority eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I'm getting at. Like there's always this like impressive power that the left wing can wield that burns out, and the right wing is always burdened by the constrictions of power
Yes.
and it can't do as much. But when you balance it correctly, something Catholic, it can both maintain things and last, and that's why I
Mm.
think Christendom. The off topic, but that earlier when I said I have doubts about nationalism, that's why I prefer Christendom to nationalism because nationalism, yeah, it has impressive power, but it burns itself out in World War One, right?
Christian Dome, like that's a big
Christendom.
area. That's what people call the West now.
Yeah, the West was a secularization of the term Christendom. Christendom
Yeah.
used to mean, like, of course, Christendom included things that weren't Western, like Ethiopia or Russia or things like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
But everybody knew Christendom was the West until it secularized and nationalized.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you want. I don't know if. Yeah, I guess it's been 2 hours. We could do one more topic before the end, or I don't know if you want to keep going.
Well, I guess I just want to kind of, I guess, yeah, it's about time to wrap up. But I was just wrapping along with you in this kind of speculative plus historical kind of visionism that we're participating in about the future of America. And if podcasting, new media, Twitter, which is really decentralized. If you see how Tucker split with the cathedral and started his own brand, and he stands on his own, but because of his history, he commands. He can get the slot at Turning Point USA, and he can literally do the leftist thing of speaking truth to power, right? But if there's all these different people talking, it's more like a Protestant kind of form of distributing knowledge and formulating power, like formulating mythos. If it's analogous at all to how Protestantism led the way from the medieval period into the modern period, by loosening the constraints that the Catholic Church at that time had on Christendom, and then allowing for mercantile industries and unfettered capitalism outside of the grasp of the constraints of Catholicism. If following Yarvin with the cathedral being the nexus of education, the government, and media, from the New York Times to whatever Spielberg's production company is called, Amblin Entertainment or DreamWorks or whatever. If the cathedral is kind of this homogenous thing where it's really odd that they all have the same opinions and they're constantly on the same page, and they get these orders that just kind of almost like virally spread through them, and that is being broken up, or something's happening on the outside of that. If that's going to kind of lead the way, if what we're participating in now is independent voices, as independent writers that don't have any credentials in the classical sense of the word, like we don't get our authority from working for the institution and being branded by the institution as legitimate. We are generating legitimacy purely by entertaining or engaging with our audience and with each other, in kind of like these fractal hierarchies, where I'm kind of downstream from Rogan and Jordan Peterson, but they're like kind of upstream from me, and they're strong enough to attract the gaze of the cathedral, where they have to be platformed, they have to be spoken about, they even have to be put down by CNN, and so on and so forth. I'm just wondering if something about how the next mythology or the next crystallization of the American West is going to, if that's going to have a part in it. And what do we learn from Protestantism and the way that power reformulated under Protestantism? And if there's any sort of predictive pattern there that we can see kind of emerging now. It's a very long-winded
Yeah.
question.
Well, yeah, like the first generation of Protestants were still very Catholic, and then the
Yeah.
second generation of Protestants were a little less Catholic. And you get this once the deconstruction begins, it's almost like they're ripping apart the body of Catholicism, finding nutritional bits to integrate
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
discarding what they don't like. It kind of sounds very Hegelian then. It's like thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah.
So like the mature Protestantism is synthesizing what it likes from the Vatican and throwing away what it doesn't. And
Hmm.
then it once it becomes thesis, it generates the antitheses of materialism and secularism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
I'll admit controversial claim, but I do kind of view things like communism and leftism as the natural secularization of Christianity. They
Hmm.
work they
I
work
think
with
that's
God, but
terribly
once you
controversial. Yeah.
yeah, they work with God, but once you take God out, once you get like unbridled from Scripture, you start getting pretty wild stuff.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things I'm working on to try to understand this, and people are constantly asking me to finally get this done. I've got like 2,000 people on Substack almost, and they're
Hmm.
constantly asking me, please, please get this done. I've been saying I want to make a kind of meta myth which looks at the gods of paganism as uh originally having been human beings that may or may not be referenced in the Bible, and what was the process by which they became gods by
Hmm.
like embellishing them, and
Yeah.
then what was the process of like how were they actually constructed? What was we talk so much about deconstruction? What was the construction process of going from Japheth in the Bible to Iapetus the Titan? Because most scholars believe these are the same people. So
Hmm.
what was that? What was the
Well,
constructive act of
yeah.
creating paganism out of the early Noahic generations? Um, and I think about it a lot because there are certain obvious overlaps. Again, like Japheth and Iapetus in the Middle Ages, they often thought, "Oh, this is the same person. Iapetus is just the mythological
Yeah.
ization of Japheth. They're spelt the same way, for goodness sake." And
Hmm.
Yavan in the Bible, he's spelt very similar to the Bronze Age spelling of Ion, the Ionians. Achaean, if you think about it, the word Achaean, it doesn't actually have a Greek basis, but in a primitive Semitic language, it literally means Ake Yawan. For Achaean, it's brother of Javan, the biblical character. So you start
Hmm.
seeing certain overlaps. We can see by how people are calling themselves in the Bronze Age and what they will become later after the Bronze Age collapse into the Classical era, how they construct through that Dark Age from the Noahic heroes to the classical gods of paganism. Like I see a lot of parallels, like the embellishing of who is Noah. Noah is there's a lot of things about Noah. Noah is, you know, he means like at rest or something. His name means like at rest. He's like
Hmm.
this wanderer. He's a drunk. He gets drunk on wine after the flood. He saves people from a flood water. And little known fact, but according to the Ethiopian traditions in Enoch, uh, Noah was born albino. He had very white skin,
Hmm.
white hair, and red eyes, like an albino people are born often with red eyes. And
Hmm.
The Ethiopian text Enoch, the Book of Enoch, explicitly says he was born albino. So, and we know from the Bible he uses birds like ravens and doves to see the world.
Yeah.
So who is this old graybeard white guy in a hood to protect himself from the sun, using ravens to see the world? It
Yeah.
sounds like Odin. Sounds like Odin. So you can see Noah gradually becoming Odin with some very minimal changes. Honestly,
Hmm. Hmm.
they both like wine. They both use ravens to see the world. Odin saves people from the blood flood in the Norse texts.
Oh yeah.
So Odin he's a Noah figure. Odin and Noah are clearly the same person. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of like you start to make these connections. You can see what were people focusing on to embellish? What were people building up and constructing
Hmm.
to create a hero, to create a hero ex nihilo from a real
Hmm.
man,
Hmm.
to found a mythology around based off his good deeds. This is in pre-Christian era. This was the work of Euhermer. Have you heard of Euhermer, the scholar?
No, I haven't.
Euherm
I don't believe so.
Euhermer. I think he's like called Euhermer Meros. He was a Greek scholar around maybe 300 BC. I don't know, maybe earlier. But he proposed this. He proposed, listen, these gods, they're really humans. They're really kings, and we embellish them. What we can learn about them is what people embellish, how we can understand how a
Hmm.
hero is made. How do you build a culture and theology around a man's good deeds? You can learn about this by seeing how real people are constructed into these almost deic figures,
Hmm.
deities. Um, and I'm trying to do that. I get a great deal of joy finding how, the neo-pagan claim is that Christianity is foreign to Europe, but once you start doing this, you realize, oh, it kind of all comes from the same area. Like there was a god amongst the Anatolian Indo-Europeans called Tarhuns, and Tarhuns had a hammer and struck people with lightning, and his followers wore little hammer pendants on their chest. So it's
Yeah.
clearly an it's the Bronze Age origin of Thor, obviously.
Yeah.
And there are all these little things. You can see the gradual move from biblical hero, just a man who did a good deed, to here's the Bronze Age embellishing of his characteristics into like more than a man, and then into the classical era. Here's a god, and I think there's a lot there that you can learn in studying
Hmm.
that in terms of how are national heroes created, how are they able to be
Hmm.
archetypes where
Yeah.
you can almost build a system on their deeds, on their words. And some cultures turn them into gods, some cultures keep them as just heroes, like Gilgamesh, he's not really a god, he's just a hero. Although Gilgamesh probably is Nimrod or someone like that. Nimrod standing on top of his tower, commanding the elements, and men worship the elements, throwing down, according to legend, throwing down lightning-like bolts of arrows from the top of his tower. It's clearly Zeus having built
Yeah.
Olympus.
Yeah.
So Nimrod is probably the origin of Zeus, and then things like
Hmm.
the Titanomachy in Greek mythology. There's actually an earlier Bronze Age version of that in the Song of Hammurabi, where a goddess tricks a god. There's this god eating his sons uh, when they're born, so he can't face any competition, and his wife tricks him with a stone so she can take a son and hide him somewhere. This is the Bronze Age version of the Titanomachy that the Greeks
Hmm.
worshipped. It's the same. It's the
Hmm.
same story. And if you dig deep enough, you find that many medieval people thought Kronos was Ham, the biblical Ham, and his children, like Zeus, they were these heroes that rose to question the post-Noahic power structure, and so they were deconstructing the Noahic power. And when Kronos castrates Oranos, this is really just Ham insulting his father Noah. It's retelling his myth. And Zeus overthrowing Kronos is really his sons overthrowing the post-flood empires. There's a lot you can go into here, finding how does ethnogenesis begin, and how does it formalize into a new system. Sorry for the
Hmm.
long rant, but these are just things to
No.
think about.
No, that was the backbone of my fictional work, which I kind of completed right before I started my internet work. But it was
Oh, you
about.
should read it.
No, I'll send you a copy. It was it was kind of what you're talking about, but I took as my presupposition not the historical tract that you seem to be taking. I don't want to distill what you're doing into just like your pattern matching through history, but there's that's going on in there, and then there's also the Jungian tact that Peterson has popularized of making this all metaphorical for states of being or realities of power, and looking at the archetypal level. But I took it as historic. My presupposition was that it is a historical fact that at the beginning of humankind, there were very strong human beings. Basically, what we would call them gods right now, but they had the power to communicate with the world and to command nature in ways that we can only dream of, that we have to use very crude technological material ways to ricochet our will off of matter into causing matter to do something that we want it. They had direct access to the spirits of the world, to the satans and the demons and the forces of the animals and even the angels. They had direct connection with the world as a spiritual place, and then and the material world, therefore, because the material world is a emanation of the spiritual world. So I took the story, and based on there's this really interesting Javanese epic that marries Islamic mythology with the Hindu mythology, and there's this story of a son of Adam who becomes a god because he doesn't want to serve God. He wants to become God. He wants to become his own God. And so he goes through the process of turning himself into a god. And then all the gods that we know of now all descend from him and the people that followed him, or who could follow him, because you can't just become a god. You actually have to.
Yeah.
You have to like meet some certain criteria. So my work was following that story as far as I could, and then showing throughout history how all of these literary forms, from myth to fairy tale to the romance novels to the modern and then the postmodern and then the critical postmodern forms of relating to and relating through narrative, relating reality through narrative, they all him, that central character, and then several other characters can manifest through these forms, and through these different forms of storytelling, they interact with history in different ways. Because these forms are kind of tied to history, like myth is from the beginning, and then fairy tale from the early beginning, and then you have the romance novels, the internal psychological novels, and then you have the postmodern critical novels. They all relate to certain phases of human culture, human reality, and therefore all the gods are always already here. And they're real. I just assume that they're real, and I kind of believe that they are real. Therefore, I don't want to mess with them. But, that was my premise. That's how the story worked out in my head. But it's a fascinating project.
No, we read in texts like Plutarch, De Oracles Defunctum, I can't remember the Latin exactly, how around the same time that Jesus was crucified and resurrected, all the magic in the world kind of seems to have started dying in a strange way. It's almost like before Jesus, men could achieve this degree of power through tying themselves to angels and demons, and they could shape reality somehow. And somehow what Christ did seems to have severed that or distant it somehow. It's unclear. And maybe that's not permanent. Maybe at some point in time, near the end, before he comes back, he lets that power out into the world again. I do
believe that humanity has had a downward arc, that we've gotten further and further away from our original station. But I think it's a boomerang. I really do think it's a boomerang. But in order for us to turn away from the material back to the spiritual as a species, not just as individuals on our own paths, there will be extinction events. There will be bottlenecks where people will not be able to proceed in the other direction, because you can't wed yourself to Satan. You can't go back to heaven once you wed yourself to Satan. Like, you actually have to go through a process of purging that relationship from you while still maintaining it via the grace of God. I'm in my own domain of very woo stuff that I don't talk about on my channel.
I forget. Are you Orthodox or Protestant? I forget.
No. My pop. I grew up evangelical, and had varying degrees of what's it called? Pentecostal experience. I mean, I was exposed to Pentecostalism, but I had internal connections with that beautiful, luscious love of God, and like that immediate love of God. And I find deep power in the catechism, in I guess the Catholic liturgy, but only when I find the right church. Like, a lot of it's just kind of the hollow shell of it. And, you know, when I go to Europe, I just spend as much time as possible in cathedrals because it's there. Like, that is there. And I don't know if it's, I'm not wise enough or perceptive enough to know if those spiritual sacred sites precede Christianity, but I do know for my own sake and for my own self that the proper way for me to relate to God is through Christianity. But I'm not that's why I can't become a Catholic, because I can't say that God and Jesus are one. Like, God is God. I'm a monotheist, and I have to until I know, I can't say that I can't follow the certain strictures of Christian belief, but I am from the bottom up a Christian, right?
I see. Yeah, yeah. I
Top
I
down, I'm a
understand.
Protestant.
No, you might actually enjoy some of the pre-Christian attempts to understand um God if he's multiple persons or as a single God.
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
how they thought about before the Catholic Church enforced their views. There
Hmm.
were a lot of pre-Christian attempts to understand this concept. Because the concept of things like the Trinity, they're kind of older than Christianity. They show up from time to time
Well,
and
reality
then
has
they
to be
die out.
older than Christianity. God is older than
Yeah, yeah,
Christianity. Just like it
yeah.
has to be the case.
Yeah, I would say definitely read the Book of Enoch because it's to me the best
Yeah. Enoch's cool,
pre-Christian.
man. I
Yeah.
have an icon of him around somewhere. I try not to dabble with I do believe these saints and these gods are all real, so I try not to dabble with them, but I just like I do know that there's realities.
Yeah.
Um
I sometimes I have from time to time painted icons of pagan gods as
hmm.
Christian saints. Like I
That's a
made
very
like an
Christian thing to
icon.
do, actually. That's a part of your
Yeah, yeah.
faith to do that.
Well, yeah, because like
They're the original
if
cultural appropriators.
yeah, if I view someone like Thor as
mm,
an early ancestor of Noah attempting to guide man as paganism
mm,
started, and
hmm.
then later on the pagans co-opted his image, why not reclaim it? So I made an icon of
Yeah,
Saint Thor praying before the cross. It was a fun
yeah.
little icon.
Is that a
Pissed a
part
lot
of
of
your
pagans off,
spiritual
but
practice to do icons and stuff? Like just not on a theological level, but on a spiritual practice level. Is that?
uh, I don't often do it. But if someone I'm reading in history has a complex life that's hard to
Hmm.
visualize from all the things that they did, I do find painting the person in like a kind of mythic way helps present the
Hmm.
images of their life in a way that my brain can adapt to better.
Hmm.
Or ordinarily, like
Hmm.
I love reading primarily, and literature is my main thing. But
Yeah.
if it's like someone like Saint, I don't think he's a saint. What is his name? He's a English. Let me remember his name. Bishop Robert. I just know that they translate as big head. Grosseteste. Grosseteste. Robert Grosseteste.
Like
He was a
huge
bishop.
balls. Is that what his name means? Gross
So
testes.
that is how is a correct translation of the Norman French, but
Okay.
officially his name is Big Head because
Oh,
I
okay.
think because the spelling is testy, but the claim is, oh no, they really meant tete, French for like head or something like that.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Tet. Yeah,
so
okay. Not
yeah,
testy. Okay.
but I'm pretty convinced it was actually Paul. But this is a bishop in England. He's a Norman bishop in England
Mm,
right after the conquest, and he is insanely overproductive in his life. He creates theories
mm,
of light. He creates a very early theory of gravity. He draws these diagrams of explaining how if you cut the earth, he believed in a spherical earth. So he said if you cut the earth like an orange into a quarter, the water would not fill on the surface until it filled the void that was cut due to gravity. And this guy's writing like 400 years before Newton, and he understands gravity.
mm, mm.
And it's actually like I find his life's works fascinating because he's really writing as if he lives in the 1700s, but he's in like the
Mm,
1200s. And
mhm,
I simply don't understand A, where he got this stuff from, B, why was he underlooked in the era, and
mm,
C,
mhm.
how is he not more well known for creating these theories independently
Yeah,
of more
yeah,
more well known figures. But I find drawing him and all the things he did in his life
yeah.
really helps me revere him better and then like
Huh.
pray to God, like God, make me like this man, make me
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
this man's spirit. Like what spirit did you put in this man? I Eliza praying about Isaiah, like give me Isaiah's spirit. It's kind of like that where like I want to understand the spirit that God put in this man and I want to touch it. I want it to be influencing
Mm.
my life. Because
Mm.
I also do crazy zany experiments that I occasionally post about, and
Really?
try to yeah, I've done my fail I dropped out of PhD, but I was doing bioengineering. So I've done like genetic stuff, and even though I'm in architecture, I was looking to how to biologically produce building materials in a way that could grow rather than like
Oh yeah.
positive growth, kind of like ecological construction rather than carbon heavy industries. So I've
Hmm.
done a lot of zany experiments in that, potentially a few patents I don't want to talk about, but
Oh,
um,
so you know how to make a poop building.
I do know how to make a poop building.
Like you can program these little enzymes to poop out a whole home for your loved ones.
At least the materials that you could build with, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, okay. It doesn't like okay. That's
No,
fine.
I got someone infamous on Twitter when I documented the process by which I engineered yeast to produce a hydrocarbon that you could burn.
Oh,
And yeah, so it wasn't quite gasoline, but my goal was to make it gasoline, just or at least diesel. So
did
I
people
took
get
some
mad at
genetic.
you? Did you get a call?
No, no, no. I have all the appropriate licenses, but no, people like they're like, oh wow, he actually did it. Like after months of watching, like I rented a supercomputer from Google to run the protein folding simulations to make sure it was valid. I
Hmm.
did a bunch of I paid a few labs to do research for me. I did a lot of venture capitalism stuff.
Wow.
And in the end, I had a little sample of yeast that could produce a flammable excrement.
Huh.
So it's something I'd like to eventually work on more when I have the time. But
Yeah.
yeah, so someone like Robert Grosseteste really influences me in the sense of like, yeah, I too have this desire to understand creation, to play with creation and dance with it and see what can be wrought to the benefit of all mankind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have this drive to just see what the next thing is, not just politically, but like technologically, economically,
Yeah.
socially.
Yeah.
I want to understand that, and it's not as if like, oh, I just want to be on the winning team. It's more like the winning team might be scary, and I want to get the hell away from it. I want to
Mm.
just understand.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I do crazy stuff. I built my own radio telescope and scanned signals. Not big. It's like a 6 foot dish. It's not big, but like scanned uh, radio signals to like see what they sound like in the electromagnetic spectrum converted to sound. It's like you can hear
Mm-hmm.
the creation. I like radio astronomy because you literally hear the stars sing, right? Like you're hearing creation sing, and
Mm-hmm.
these are just all the like there are these endless zany experiments I do for fun just to see if I can do it, if I can understand
Mm-hmm.
creation to a degree to do something, not just theory, but like practice.
Mm.
So that
Hmm.
yeah, my current zany experiment is trying to create a graphene based transistor, so I can potentially make a chip that could operate at extremely high temperatures and have a very high clock rate. And maybe I can play with it somehow. I don't know, but
Hmm.
that's less likely to happen. I'm too busy now for this stuff. I'm in my early 30s. I don't have the free time I used to.
Yeah.
I'm realizing I should probably stop being a shut-in mad scientist and actually invest in like settling down or something so that I don't end
So
up being a shut-in all
you're
my
not
life.
yet married then?
No, not yet. A lot.
Hmm.
I'm not an incel. I'm more like I just
Hey, dude,
never.
Catholics aren't incels. They're called
Yeah,
monks.
they're monks exactly. I've been monkish. I've actually often considered if I should just become like a priest or a monk and just stay at a monastery and do this stuff because it's my real
Mm-hmm.
passion.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm also kind of the mind of like, well, I mean, I'm in an era that defines success as not just surviving, but like building something and like having a family. And to some degree, I'm wondering if I've
Mm-hmm.
wasted so many of my years ignoring uh yeah, I just always ignored people that were interested in me, and it's not good. It's not healthy because
Hmm.
you use it as an excuse to not engage with people in real life sometimes, and then
Mm-hmm.
it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle where, oh, I could just do this crazy experiment instead of actually meaningfully building things,
Yeah.
not just for my own curiosity, but like something that would actually improve the world or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
no,
a
there's
family would.
that, unless you're called, and I think that that's a very, very special and a very, very rare calling to be celibate. It's a very noble calling, but from my perspective, it's very, very rare. But if you search your fate and search God's desires for your life, and you find that yeah, family and therefore a wife is in the cards, then there's aspects of yourself that open up, and like
Yeah.
self-knowledge that comes to you, and growth and development, like if you want to put a positive spin on these things, await you down that path. And Godspeed to all the men and women who embark on that. I think it's such a core part of the human experience. And there's trade-offs, you can't make graphene chips and write an awesome Substack and spend 2.5, 3 hours on a rando's podcast,
Yeah.
with all these other things. But there's rewards for you. And I really do pray that you find that the right person, the right people for you, if that's what your heart is being called to.
That's the thing. I don't feel called to it. It kind of feels like something
Hmm.
I'm pushing on myself to be more normal. And that's
Hmm.
what makes me wonder, am I just doing this as an act? Like, is it just because I want
Hmm.
to be like all the other cool people on the internet that settle down and have a kid or something?
Yeah.
Or is it something that's really I don't know yet. I feel like I should have figured that out by my early 30s.
Yeah.
Uh,
Men have a different arc, or
it's true,
men
it's
can
true.
afford to have a different arc. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. It's like
So,
it
yeah.
sorry, go on.
No, no, you.
I was like I like look up to people like Newton, but don't want to end up like this crazy schizophrenic
Yeah.
shut-in that's making true and important contributions to science, but also doing alchemy on the side and having
Yeah.
crazy theories.
Yeah. Lay off the mercury in that case. Don't get too close with your materials and your material science
Exactly.
fiascos. So where can people find you, and what are they going to find, generally speaking, when they get there?
Uh, Primarily, I'll say my Substack. It's my name, aelthemplar.substack.com. I think I also have the link aelth.substack.com, just Aelth. They both link to the same art stuff, Substack, and they'll find mostly history and theology stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and occasionally criticisms of American politics.
Mm-hmm.
I I've been criticizing MAGA a lot recently just because it feels like a circus show. And
That's what it is.
yeah, and I used to criticize progressives a lot for this for like it seems like progressives are shock value and MAGA is a circus value. And
Hmm.
I'm I'm trying to do less politics now just because we're in this period of uncertainty where the ecosystem is changing. It
Hmm.
almost feels like I
Hmm.
don't want to write the epitaph before the body is in the tomb.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know how things go on from here. It seems like we're at some kind of political crossroads. And so a lot of my articles are now going to switch over to more theology, more history, the meta myth idea that I'm trying to work
Hmm.
on.
Hmm. Hmm.
My last few articles have primarily dealt with trying to view liberal democracy as a religion, as a theology, how it's creating the seeds of its own destruction in like the Hegelian sense.
Hmm.
Um, I do want to explore more some Nietzsche things, to like what he got right and what he got wrong.
Hmm.
And I really want to get more into actual Catholic scholars from the 19th and early 20th century that were dealing with this thing when they were first appearing, but aren't well known nowadays.
Hmm.
De Maestro is always a famous one, but there are others.
Hmm. Yeah, just a brilliant, fascinating mind. It's been
Thank you.
great to hang out with you, and thanks very much for coming on my show. I will link to your work because it's impossible to spell your name just by hearing it.
Yes, yes.
I'll link to your
Yeah,
work in the description.
the irony is, even though I do like Old English and choose an Old English name, it's much more because I like Tolkien than I'm actually English. I'm
Mm,
just all Irish, Greek, and Italian. There's
yeah.
a there's like a 0.8% Ashkenazi in there that I love
Mm.
bringing up when I'm debating with groypers or stuff like that. I just bring it's kind of like one of those like it's something to bring up to scare away the Spurgs.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they'll just call you names and run away, and then serious people will actually talk with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
But no, I'm mostly just Irish and Greek and Italian,
Mm.
and despite that, I really like the way Tolkien worked with Old English, and so I like Aelthemplar just as a Old
Yeah.
English Tolkien-esque approach to Greek mythology.
People were freaked out when you disappeared from Twitter. They thought you got banhammered, but I guess you just decommissioned yourself for a break.
Yeah, it's really going down in quality, and
Mm.
I feel like it feels like my head is full of memes rather than ideas, and so I
Yeah.
want
Okay.
to,
Yeah.
you know, break away for a few months, let my
Yeah.
brain get back into good things that are useful for the human soul and not, you know, in many ways, Twitter and memes culture, it feels like a ghost dance. It feels like people are
Hmm.
high on hopium of things, and it feels like if you let that fill your soul too much,
Hmm.
you become a broken person, and I
Hmm.
greatly fear becoming a broken person.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Well, the
thank you for
Protestant in me would want to say that, well, we're all broken people, so that's why Jesus is knocking on your door. You know.
yes. No, I thank you for your show. I do enjoy the converse. It's fun to just have fun and talk about ideas in a calm way that isn't like spectacle or energetic. It's just going through and looking at things. I
Yeah.
turn it on from time to time. It's always great.
Well, good. I'm really glad to introduce you to my audience. So, with that said, I'm going to end the recording. Thank you very much for tuning in, everybody. There we go.